A Cowboy for Always, Riverdale Ranch Romance Book Number 4, written by Jewel Allen, narrated by Melissa Connell and Scott Rose. Author's Note. Dear reader, I am grateful you've chosen to read this cowboy romance that has been waiting in my imagination and my heart for a long time. When I first started publishing the Riverdale Ranch romance series in December of 2018, I knew right away that Althea and Sheldon Brown, the matriarch and patriarch of the Brown family, were special people with a lot of love to give. A Cowboy for Always was my way of discovering what their love story was and how their children, Bram, Gabe, and Tammy, entered their lives. Sheldon came along with 5 interesting brothers, so naturally, I am inspired to write happily ever afters for them too. You might notice that the Brown brothers' storyline is pre-cell phone era, approximately the 80s, which makes for some interesting situations like getting stranded without phones, etc. I hope you enjoy the continuation of the Brown family stories at Riverdale Ranch in Sunnyridge, Colorado. And as always, thank you for reading my stories. Jewel. Chapter 1. Althea. April. And here we are, the realtor announced like they'd arrived at Disneyland. The metaphor seemed appropriate because after the bumps and ruts on the dirt road, Althea Thompson felt she'd just been on a roller coaster ride. After the dust cleared, she looked out her window and cringed. "That is the house?" she said, gripping the car door handle for support. "I'm pretty sure." Noelle peered past her. "I think that's a 57 on the mailbox, right?" The mailbox was an empty gallon of milk configured to accept mail and attached to a post in a wood barrel, about 15 degrees crooked. As Althea looked on, it seemed to tip another 5 degrees further. It's hard to tell. She squinted at the handwritten numbers in faded black permanent marker ink. That could be a 1. Noelle looked around. "There's not any other houses here, so this must be it." That was a bit of an understatement. This was the only house, literally, for miles. This wasn't very promising. "We're kind of far from the freeway," she said, reminding Noelle of one of her conditions, proximity to amenities, when they started house hunting that morning. The realtor gave her a sheepish smile. "Unfortunately, for your price range, we won't find a lot of properties on a major road." Althea chewed on her lip. "How are people supposed to find my bed and breakfast if it's in the boonies?" "Isn't B&B supposed to stand for bed and boonies?" Noelle laughed at her attempt at a joke. When Althea didn't join in, she sighed. "Listen, it's all in the marketing." She waved vaguely. "The fresh air." She raised her nose to the air and sniffed. "The solitude. Farms all around. I bet there's a pig somewhere here poking through the bushes." Althea looked past the house and shuddered. "I hope not. Pigs can be mean." "Oh?" Noelle raised an eyebrow. "How do you know?" "Don't tell me you haven't seen where the red fern grows." "Oh, right. Maybe cows then." Althea considered the scraggly patch of weeds under one of the front windows. "Do cows eat rose bushes? I want to plant some." Noelle blinked. "I have no idea. I'm a realtor, not some agriculture science expert." She gave off an unladylike snort. Althea glanced at the 2-story house once again. Apart from its dilapidated appearance, the rural location did seem promising, and, like Noelle pointed out, the low price was tempting. She could already see the B&B ad copy. "Escape from the city and experience country life at its simplest. Complete with a resident pig, 2 cows, and 6 chickens." Fresh eggs for an omelet sounded good. Her stomach rumbled. Lunch was a long time ago. "Well?" Noelle flashed Althea a wide smile as she opened her door. "Let's go see this place." Althea followed Noelle through the yard. The realtor made her way in high heels like she was trying to avoid minefields in the dirt front yard. Or cow pies by the looks of it. "A plus to this place is," Noelle said, picking up the thread of conversation easily, "no one will trample you to get to it first." "That's a plus for sure." Althea said, shrugging her purse in place as she herself tried to step carefully. And you can start the lawn from scratch. Althea nodded as they stopped at the front porch. Once stained a red wood, it was now badly weathered, looking unsafe. Who lived here before? Althea wondered aloud. Noelle consulted her sheet. It's an estate sale, so an older person, most likely. Althea tested the porch step, which creaked loudly. Oh, dear, Noelle said. Maybe we shouldn't go in. We're already here, Althea said, squaring her shoulders. We might as well. If you promise not to sue me if your foot goes through the floorboard, then I'm in. Althea glanced at Noelle curiously. Has anyone ever sued you for that? Nope, you're my first showing, so I'm your first ever showing? No wonder Noelle was able to meet with Althea at the drop of a hat. Yes, Noelle winced, but don't hold it against me. I passed the realtor exam. Okay, after 3 tries, but still, if you buy this house, you'd be my first sale. You'll hold that honor, she beamed. Absolutely no pressure. With that sales pitch, Noelle approached the front door. While she fumbled with the key box, Althea turned so she faced the yard and the road. She tried to picture herself living in this town. Sunnyridge, a small dot on the Colorado map. Back in Denver, there was a 7-Eleven at every corner. How would she get her Slurpee cravings? Did they even have a grocery store here? Something to her left caught her eye, a big cloud of dust. A tornado? Golly, it better not be. Like something conjured out of a cowboy movie, Althea watched as a half-dozen cowboys on horseback appeared over the rise, flanking a herd of over 100 cows on either side, guiding them down the road. Several dogs of various breeds ran alongside, their tongues lolling happily. From behind her, Althea heard the lock click, the doors swing open, and Noelle step inside the house. "Here we go," the realtor said. But Althea couldn't tear her gaze from the scene. At any moment, the men would pass the house. She was actually witnessing a real cattle drive. It was like testosterone in action. 6 cowboys worth. "Howdy, ma'am," the cowboy closest to her greeted Althea, his gaze warm. His voice was low, sexy. If he were in a quartet, he'd be the guy with the nice baritone making the fake drum beats. They were all good-looking, as cowboys went, and tipped their hats at her. But the one who greeted her was particularly attractive, with his trimmed beard and gleaming dark eyes. Good-looking, like the last guy who broke her heart. She smiled, friendly-like, but not encouraging. She didn't want him stopping his horse, pulling her up for a kiss, and asking her out on a date, as she was sure all cowboys in these parts did. One of the men whistled, and a sheepdog ran alongside, nipping at the cows. The cows gave it dirty looks, but stayed in line. Althea watched open-mouthed. Her own dog, Bubbles, could never be off-leash because she was always wandering off, let alone try to keep a bunch of cows in line. She looked up to see the first cowboy admiring her, making her melt like cream cheese frosting when put on hot cinnamon rolls too soon. And then the parade was over. The cowboys went on down the road, taking the cows to who knew where, leaving once again that little dust cloud in their wake. "Yoo-hoo!" Noelle said from behind her. "Are you coming?" The realtor's words ended in a gasp. "Oh, my word! Do you see what I'm seeing?" Althea nodded, still reeling from that exciting little encounter. Noelle grabbed her arm. "You should definitely buy this house." Althea turned, dazed, and then laughed. "How about if we look in it first?" "Okay, but the cowboys are for sure a plus." Noelle fanned herself. "If only I didn't have to get my Starbucks fix. I'd move here myself in a heartbeat." Inside, Noelle was still going on and on about what an amazing sight that cattle drive was. "Just think, if you nabbed one of those guys, you would have little kids in rodeo and all." "I'm not having any kids," Althea said. "Well, of course, not right away. No, I meant I can't have kids." "Oh." Noelle came out of her room looking embarrassed. "So sorry. I didn't mean to offend." "No offense taken," Althea shrugged. "It's just the way life is. I have a basset instead." Noelle blinked. "Like those dogs with the big ears and short legs?" "Yup. That's cute. I wish I had the patience for dogs," she made a face, "but they're too dirty and high maintenance. Anyway, As I was saying, you could still marry one of those cowboys. Althea shook her head. I won't be getting married. Noelle stared at her for a minute and whispered, like, never? Never. That's kind of permanent, isn't it? Well, yeah, marriage is also kind of permanent. Noelle blinked even more rapidly. Can I ask why? Why I don't want to marry? Althea hedged. Noelle nodded. I almost married once, Althea said. She'd been dating Larry for a year, thinking he was it. She finally opened up to him about her infertility, stemming from a genetic condition. Larry wasn't willing to adopt. He said his family was particular about having biological heirs, as if they were some royal family. He ditched me, Althea said, and it hurt too much, so I decided I'm done with men. What? Noelle said. You're one and done? You have to give other guys a chance. The way Noelle was looking at her, like she had just sprouted alien horns, made Althea think that Noelle was the type of woman not to run short of dates. Noelle was bubbly and attractive and probably already had a devoted boyfriend. Well, it'll take a special guy. One who wouldn't freak out because she couldn't have his biological children. One who might be willing to adopt. And, Althea added, I've discovered I don't need a man to make me complete. To head Noelle off, in case she was going to try to sell her on the benefits of having a man, Althea went farther into the family room, into a kitchen area. The orange shag carpet was all matted down. That would for sure have to go. The avocado green counter color, too, but it still seemed to be in decent shape. The renovations wouldn't have to be done right away, but it would be nice to update fairly soon. She took a piece of paper out of her purse and wrote her to-do list. Kitchen linoleum, window coverings, newer windows, repaint cupboards, replace fridge light bulb. The list went on as they left the kitchen for another area. Outdated light coverings. Closet doors that needed to be put back on track, peeling wallpaper in a sort of psychedelic silver pattern in one of the bedrooms. This place was going to take a lot of work. She was exhausted just thinking about it. But the house itself had promise. It had so much room. The listing said it had 6 bedrooms, perfect for a bed and breakfast. Want to look upstairs? Noelle asked. Sure. As Noelle put a hand on the railing, there was a loud crack. Oh, dear. She moved her hand away and turned to Althea with big round eyes full of guilt. Stair railing, Althea added to the list, underlining it. She followed Noelle up the stairs without touching anything. Once on the landing, she looked down the hallway at the 3 open doors to what looked like bedrooms and braced herself. Like the rest of the house, the bedrooms had peeling wallpaper and matted shag, but a lot of light poured in through the windows. Noelle walked over to one and whistled long and low. Wow, just wow. Althea joined her. There was farmland as far as Althea's eye could see, alternating between yellow rectangles and green, like a patch quilt. To the east, scattered neighborhoods formed more dense clusters. But this side of town, there was just fields, eventually sloping up to beautiful mountains. She wondered if that cowboy who tipped his hat lived close. He probably wasn't even single. He no doubt already had a gazillion kids and the perfect wife who ironed his plaid shirts and even his jeans so they stood up ready for him to jump into. Imagine your guests waking up to this in the mornings, Noelle said. Althea turned to her. Wow, you're good. It sounds like an ad voiceover. You think? Noelle turned pink. I did study broadcast journalism. That detail did not surprise Althea. Yes, I really do. Plus, there's real-life cowboys here. Althea shook her head. Not a plus in my book. Not for you, Noelle rolled her eyes. For your guests to see in action. Oh, right. Althea blushed. Why was her brain thinking in the direction of romance? That cattle drive we saw earlier, Noelle said. It's like one of those reenactments of the Old West, except here. It's for real. Althea laughed. Can I steal that for my ad copy? Steal all you want. Noelle gave her a questioning glance. So, what'll it be? Simply looking at the landscape out the window made Althea's body relax. She hadn't felt this happy or free in a long time. In her heart, a little click seemed to lock her decision in place. If everything pans out with the inspection, she said, I want it. Noelle stared at her. Really? Althea nodded firmly, as though to convince herself. Really? Noelle hugged her, taking Althea by surprise. Thank you for being my first sale. It took a bit of doing to get used to the realtor's exuberance. Althea didn't want to burst her bubble, reminding her nothing was official yet, so she graciously said, You're welcome. They walked around the property, which was as bad as Althea imagined, overgrown with weeds and pockmarked by holes of what looked like some underground animal. But by then, Althea didn't care. The house would be fairly livable if she could stand the wallpaper for a few weeks. She'd slowly chip away at the remodel. The thought of putting her own stamp on this old house was exciting and a little daunting, as was the thought of possibly sighting a certain cowboy again.
Chapter 2. Sheldon. "Looks like you're going to get a new neighbor," Patrick said. Sheldon Brown glanced over his shoulder at his oldest brother, who was still sitting funny in his saddle from getting bucked off his last bareback bronc. Really, at 40, Patrick was getting too old for rodeo, but don't anyone tell him that. "You think?" Sheldon asked, hoping that Patrick was right. The lady on the porch sure was a sight for a passel of bachelor cowboys. A gorgeous one at that. 28-year-old McCoy, Sheldon's youngest brother and most excitable of the bunch, was all praises as usual. Sheldon didn't say anything, though he agreed. He recalled those brunette waves that reached her shoulders and those dark eyes watching him with interest. Her rosy lips parting in a glimmer of a smile. Not too friendly, which only made her more interesting. Heath, the second youngest brother at 30, whistled for his sheepdog Amos, who heeled right away. "She doesn't seem the type to buy a house out in the country." "So now you're an expert on women too, not just dogs?" Dylan teased. Dylan, 36, was the second oldest and the one who knew the most about women, having married for a short while until his wife died, leaving him with a toddler to raise by himself. Sheldon shot Heath a curious glance. "What makes you say that?" "Well, she's dressed for the city for one. Everyone here wears plaid shirts and blue jeans." "Just as well," Sheldon said, thinking back to how her black slacks and pale pink blouse with a bow at the throat flattered her figure. "What?" Heath snorted, peering at Sheldon. "You have a hankering for city girls now?" Hunting and dogs, that's all Heath cared about. Girls, country or city, barely made the top 10. Too hard to train, he liked to say. "I only have a hankering for stew, if you must know," Sheldon lied. "You mean burnt stew?" McCoy sounded glum. Chandler, their 32-year-old middle brother, moseyed over to McCoy and slapped the back of his head. "Now don't you badmouth Pop's cooking." "Just being realistic is all." McCoy jerked back to avoid another slap. "It's just not the same without Mom." Everyone grunted their agreement. After Mom passed away in the last year, Pop had seemed kind of lost without her, just like all of them. "But it's still food," Patrick said. As the oldest of Travis Brown's sons, he always acted like he had to protect the family honor. "So we'd better get going or it'll be too dark to tell our boots from our plates." Once they got the cattle to their mountain pasture where the cows would graze for the time being, the brothers loaded up the horses into 2 trailers and trundled along the country roads to the Browns' sprawling ranch of about 80,000 acres. They'd normally head to their separate bunkhouses, but tonight it was dinner with Pop, and maybe even trading stories around the campfire. Pop was forging some horseshoes in his big workshop when they got there. He stopped hammering on the red-hot metal and grunted his greeting when Sheldon approached. "How'd it go?" Pop asked. "Good. Nothing out of the ordinary. Except for a sighting of a beautiful city slicker, that is." "All the cattle accounted for?" "Yep." Pop glanced out the open workshop door. "I wish I could have gone." Sheldon didn't say anything for a long moment. He knew it about killed Pop to admit that he missed it, let alone that he passed up the cattle drive this year. It was just since Mom died, Pop hadn't been the same. Sheldon and his brothers didn't know what to do to get him out of his rut. The thought had been bandied around to keep Pop busy around the ranch as usual, but they were all taking it a day at a time. "Maybe you could still the next time," Sheldon offered. "Maybe," Pop winced. "I burned the stew I was supposed to serve you guys, so I went into the store and got some ribs." "Ribs are good." Sheldon felt like licking his lips. "It'll be another hour or two. I stuck it in the oven like Mom taught me once." His voice wobbled at the mention of her name. Sheldon tipped his hat to acknowledge it, but Pop wouldn't want his pity or nothing. "I can tell the rest." Pop glanced once again toward the workshop's open bay door. "Yes, you do that. Where are they?" "They're just outside chewing the fat." Sheldon went outside to tell his brothers. McCoy gave him an "I told you so" look, but wisely stayed quiet. "There's time for you to run if you want," Dylan suggested, looking at Patrick. Patrick stayed in shape for bronc riding by running the dirt roads around the ranch. "Nah." Patrick tipped his chair back and shook his head. "It's gonna be dark soon. I don't want to step on a rattler. Maybe tomorrow." Chandler started a campfire from discarded wood. They sat around in companionable silence, everyone tuckered out at the end of a long day in saddle. It was like old times, and it felt good. Since Mom died, Sheldon and his brothers kind of lost their glue, and it was harder to stay closer to home, it seemed like. It would take some effort to recapture the old ways. Since Mom died, a lot of things had changed around here. Pop turned off the propane and joined them outside. He seemed like his old self, smiling and jumping into conversations that erupted between the brothers. Sheldon was glad. They needed Pop around for a long, long time. "Someone was looking at the house near Sheldon's," Patrick said, squinting up at the darkening night sky. Sheldon knew that look well, his brother stirring up trouble. "The Farland home?" Pop asked. Patrick nodded. In the flames of the fire, his eyes glinted with mischief. "She might be single, from the looks of it." Sheldon poked the fire with a stick, causing ashes and sparks to fly. "Just what we need," Pop said. "One woman for all 6 of you to fight over." "I've got my Winnie," Patrick said. Winnie had been his girlfriend for the past 2 years. "I'm all set." "No thanks for me, too," Dylan said. "I'm good with my Tater." Tater was his soon-to-be 8-year-old daughter. "Don't need another woman after Jessie." "Tater's gonna need a mama someday soon," Chandler said without looking up from the toy he was whittling for their niece. He built cabinets for a living and could fiddle with wood all day if he had his druthers. "Anyway," Dylan said, shrugging off the suggestion, "we've all decided this one is going to be for Sheldon." "You've all decided, have you?" Sheldon said, hooking his thumbs in his belt loops. After exchanging gazes over the fire, his brothers all nodded and smirked. Sheldon frowned. They were always bent on trouble, but this time he was the unwilling target. "How about we officially wait to see if she's really moving into it and if she's single?" "And then you'd ask her out on a date?" McCoy asked. "Well, no," he set his jaw. "I didn't say that." "Come on," Patrick said. "You're not still all hung up on being left at the altar by Kimmy, are you?" Sheldon bristled at the rehashing of old memories. He didn't think it would still sting 2 years later, but it did. His pride had never recovered, standing in that old church building waiting for Kimmy when she'd already eloped the next state over with her on-again, off-again ex. "Of course not," he lied. "Good." Patrick chewed on a piece of hay. "Because she ain't worth swearing off women." "What about you, Patrick?" Sheldon pointed at him. "When you gonna pop the question to Winnie?" "Funny," Patrick said, smiling to himself. "She was asking the same question the other day." "And what was your answer?" Pop asked. Patrick's easy expression didn't change, but an edge crept into his voice. I said, when rodeo season is over, we can talk more about it. So... Heath stirred from where he sat on a tree stump, scratching behind the back of his dog's ear. In 10 years? Patrick adjusted his hat. Not that long. I hope not, Pop harumphed. I won't live that long to see you guys married. It was the truth, most likely. Everyone knew it, but would never admit it. To Pop's face, anyway. They all believed he would live forever. Like they thought Mom would. Winnie will wise up and leave you if you don't watch it, Dylan said. Patrick slouched into his chair, all relaxed. Winnie and I have this understanding. I have rodeo and she has her boot collection. Yes, she'll give you the boot all right, Dylan guffawed. Sheldon nodded. Patrick had better get his head on straight and not mess it up with Winnie, who was about the only girl in the world who put up with Patrick. Pop stood and looked around at all the brothers. I sure wish Mom had lived long enough for y'all to be married. I'd have to get out of this town to find a woman foolish enough to marry me, McCoy said. Amen, Chandler said, and the two scuffed around like they usually did. Pop wisely dropped all the marriage talk and led the brothers into the house they'd grown up in, keeping their boots on as Mom tolerated. She didn't think it was realistic to maintain a house with 6 strapping cowboys, so she just had everyone keep their boots on. Except in bed. She expected them to draw the line there. The good old kitchen was a little smoky from the ribs and smelled so good. Sheldon was raring to dig into the meat. Mom would have reminded them all to wash up and had ingrained it so much that Sheldon and a few of his brothers still did it. And then it was time for chow. The ribs weren't as tender as they'd had in the past, with Mom putting some potion of soda and who knew what else to tenderize the meat, but it was still good. They all looked like cavemen tearing chunks off with their teeth, licking their fingers between bites. Still doing planning and zoning, Sheldon? Pop asked. Probably will till I die. Albert is what, 90? Albert Roberry had served on P&Z for as long as Sheldon could remember. He did seem to be getting on in years, though his mind still stayed sharp. Albert asked detailed questions about stormwater runoff that no one otherwise caught. Probably older, more like 120. Like Methuselah, McCoy quipped. That goes for Albert and the 2 old-timers, not Darla. She's young, you gotta give her that, Pop said. But whose dingbat idea was it to put a realtor on the P&Z? Her husband is the realtor, Sheldon corrected, and she just does his company's books. Same difference, Pop sniffed loudly. The mayor thought it'd be a good idea, being that she's a newcomer, Sheldon said. Honestly, too many of these newcomers are ruining the town. Heath gestured with a stripped rib bone. Yesterday I had to wait to turn into the feed store parking lot for 2 minutes. Geez, Patrick drawled. How terribly inconveniencing. Heath scowled. It was about closing time, so of course I got impatient. I was running low on dog food. Anyway, Pop told Sheldon. Don't you let her get away with nothing. Sheldon rubbed his nape. I can't promise anything, Pop. I just do my work and have a vote like everyone does. You don't want those mile-high apartments that have been springing up all over, do you? Pop looked Sheldon in the eye. Nope. And any motels by farmland if he had his way, Sheldon added silently. Pop's features relaxed. Good. Just checking.
Chapter 3. Althea. Well, Bubbles, Althea said, what do you think? Bubbles, her 2-year-old basset hound, squiggled to a sitting position in the passenger seat and looked out the window. She was drooling more than usual, so Althea took it as a sign the house was to her liking. This house was now Althea's, and she couldn't be more excited. There had been a few hiccups along the way. For instance, the bank had concerns about the roof, but once it passed inspection, it was pretty much smooth sailing. Bubbles seemed to sense Althea's excitement too, patting around with her cute large paws and whining. "I know," Althea said. "It'll be fun, won't it?" The whining got louder. Althea realized this was a bladder issue and not so much excitement over the house. "Let me get the door open Before Althea could finish walking around to open the door and help Bubbles out, she'd already partially done her business. Luckily, the seat was vinyl. Althea blew out a frustrated breath as Bubbles sniffed at the ground, blissfully unrepentant. "It's a good thing you're cute," she said, clipping a leash onto Bubbles' collar. She grabbed leftover napkins from her glove compartment and sopped up the mess, tossing it all in the garbage can parked along the garage door. She'd have to do a more thorough cleaning of the car later. For today, she was checking to make sure that a short list she'd given to a handyman had been done. Crossing the threshold, she let go of Bubbles' leash and examined the stairs. She checked in the kitchen as well, and to her relief, everything looked as it should. Althea walked to the backsliding door and looked out with pleasure at the bright green of trees leafing out that had started growing since the spring rains, ringing brown fields. This was the life. To have the advantage of farmland right behind your house without having to do all that work. A shrill ring broke the silence. Althea cocked her head in surprise before remembering that she'd had the phone company hook up a phone already. The receiver hung from a wall mount, and she picked it up to answer it. "Althea!" Noelle sounded relieved. "I'm so glad I got a hold of you." "Why? What's happened?" She put a hand to her chest. "Well, I happened to check with the city about your plan to run a bed and breakfast in this house." "And?" Her hand tightened around the phone handle. Noelle paused. "They said you hadn't filed your application yet." "What application?" Noelle sounded like she was trying to explain to a child. "The application so you can change your house's zoning. It's not zoned for a business." "What do you mean it's not zoned for a business?" "It means unless you get a conditional use permit or change the zoning, you wouldn't be able to run a B&B. Althea's heart pounded as realization of her situation hit her. "But you knew that was my plan all along. It's not like I was keeping it a secret. Why didn't you tell me this before I bought it?" "I did. When we went over the papers, I pointed out to you that the lot was residential." Althea frowned. "I don't remember this conversation. I'm sorry, totally my fault. I may have said something like, 'You'll have to check on what you need to do with the city for your B&B.'" Althea closed her eyes and leaned against the wall. "You should have made a huge sign and gotten my attention with a bullhorn. I thought you meant about utilities. Sorry, I just assumed that you knew that was the process." Althea wanted to retort that she was no real estate expert, Noelle was, but she clamped her mouth shut. Regardless of whose fault this was, she needed to find a solution. "Okay, fine, so I need a permit. I take it I just go to the city?" "Yes, soon, because they usually meet for these permits once a month." Althea blew out a frustrated breath. "Thanks. I mean, really, I'm a bit upset, but well, we'll just deal with it. Thanks so much for not biting my head off. You're real classy." "Don't worry about it. I'll let you know what I find out." "And I can be there if you want someone on your side." "Sure. I'll find out when it is. If you can come, then that would be fantastic." "Perfect." Althea hung up, upset that she'd overlooked such a big detail. She'd gotten carried away by her dream. Maybe this was some sign that she shouldn't be running a B&B. Her parents' voices played in her head again. "You sure you want to work in interior design? I don't know many who aren't married to a breadwinner. You're so good with numbers. Accounting is a safer bet." So after that talk, Althea went the safe route and became an accountant. It paid the bills, but some days she fantasized about decorating the company building instead of being closed in by four walls crunching numbers. And here she was doubting herself again. She shook her head. No longer a little girl, she'd go ahead and make her dream happen. She would try to fix this little blip. And if it was meant to be, then she'd get the permit. And if she was not meant to do it here, then... "Hello?" Althea straightened up from where she was leaning on the kitchen counter and turned toward the sound of the voice. That voice, the deep baritone she'd thought about once in a while, wondering if she would ever hear it again. Where she stood, she could see a masculine hand knocking on her open door. "Hello?" The cowboy's voice boomed again.
Chapter 4. Sheldon. Sheldon held the basset hound's leash in his hand. "Your owner had better be home, Buster." He went quiet when the woman whom he suspected owned this puppy appeared in the doorway. He couldn't speak right away, his attention arrested by eyes of dark blue that made him think of gazing low in the horizon at the sky at dusk. A fringe of thick, sooty lashes framed them. Her lips, stained a pretty rose, parted in wonder as she looked at him. During the cattle drive, he'd thought her pretty. Up close, she made his knees want to buckle under. Sheldon cleared his throat. "Sheldon Brown." "Hello, I'm Althea Thompson." She blinked up at him. She came maybe to his chest, and then at the dog. "Bubbles!" She took the leash from Sheldon and gave him a worried glance. "Oh no, was she wandering the road?" Worse. Sheldon's fists settled at his hips. "She was in my place and stole my lunch." She was silent for a moment and then burst out laughing. He squinted at her, kind of smirking because his accusation did sound ridiculous. "Sorry," she said, covering her mouth with slender fingers. "But you must admit, that's kind of funny." He mock glared. "My lunch happened to be leftover homemade ribs that I'd been looking forward to eating." Her beautiful eyes danced. "How did she get them off your table?" "I have no idea. Why don't you ask her?" Crouching, she inspected Bubbles' face. "Oops. Yep. She's got telltale barbecue sauce all over." She stood and looked repentant. "Sorry." She looked past him to the road. "She went all the way to your place?" "It's not that far by foot. It just looks it. My house is tucked behind a bend in a dirt road." She stood and continued to hold her dog's leash. "She's pretty bad. I even had her trained when she was a puppy, but she does like to wander. I'm going to have to build a kennel out back and then eventually fence the yard." "Yes, that may be smart. A hound, especially one not used to these parts, could easily get lost and end up miles away." "I know," she sighed. "Plus, we have an overzealous dog catcher who insists on everyone keeping their pets in their yard." "Thanks for the warning." She sidled a glance at Sheldon. "Tell you what, I make delicious ribs. Maybe I could invite you over sometime for dinner to make up for Bubbles' crime?" Underneath her words was a hesitation that piqued his curiosity, like she was second-guessing herself. Dinner? With those pretty eyes angled at him? It sounded wonderful. No, it sounded like the last thing he should do. "Maybe you ought to ask your husband first," he suggested. Her eyebrow rose. "I don't have a husband, and if I did, I would not need his permission." Her lip twitched. "Maybe you should be asking your wife." "If I had one," he retorted. "Well, at least I got that all cleared up." But no, he wasn't interested in another heartbreaker, especially a newcomer to town who probably would shy away from the realities of country living like his ex did. "Thanks for the dinner invitation," he said firmly, "but an apology is enough." "Right." She appeared relieved herself. "I'm sure you're busy. I'll be busy myself renovating this place for my B&B." He was sure he'd misheard. "Pardon me?" "B&B?" she repeated. "You know, bed and breakfast?" "I know what that is." His pulse pounded. "Seriously now?" She nodded, wariness creeping into her eyes. "Yes? Is there a problem with that?" "There's all sorts of problems with that." "Oh, yeah?" Her eyes narrowed. "Like what?" "Like, for starters, this is farmland here." He looked around in case she wasn't paying attention. She stood in stony silence, looking unimpressed. "In the summer," he continued, "I bale hay all day, some days till midnight." She hardly even blinked. He was on a roll. Newcomers to this town have been known to clog up the phone lines, complaining to the mayor about the noise. She raised an eyebrow. And what does that have to do with my B&B? Your guests will complain, which means you'll complain to the city, and pretty soon they're going to shut down my farming. Gosh, you're paranoid, she erupted. Am I? He ground his teeth. I've seen it with my 2 eyes. The butcher used to haul carcasses down to a field, his own land, and people complained, so now he no longer butchers. She winced. That's disgusting anyway. Not if you've been doing that for generations, he shot back. For several seconds she studied his face. Her eyes reflected the warmth of the beautiful spring day, and he steeled himself from softening. I know the reason I have you running scared, she said with a tone of wonder. He stared at her in confusion. A shot of fear coursed through him, and plenty of unwanted attraction. And what is that? The corner of her mouth rose. That I'm going to place Sunnyridge on the map with my B&B. That people will find your small town and want to move here, and all these newcomers will come. He could only gape at her, speechless. She'd nailed it on the head, even though he might never admit that this woman, this potential adversary, was right. Except, that's not what I'm trying to do. Her voice turned soft. I want to run a low-key kind of operation. Just enough to make a profit so I can cook for people, house, and mother them. Is that so very bad? Mother them, he scoffed, but the word drove its shaft into the center of his heart. He knew exactly what mothering was. His own dear departed mother had been good at it, and now his family no longer had that, as they were so pitifully discovering. Also, she said, sizing him up with those lovely perceptive eyes that seemed to see right through his plaid shirt into his heart. I think you're scared of change. If your town gets something like this, then why not something else, like a mall, or a Costco, or worse, a karaoke bar? He groaned. I hate karaoke bars. They never get the George Strait songs right. He coughed, reverting to what he hoped was an expression she could take seriously, because he was serious. Her expression was smug as she folded her arms across her chest. So I'm right. And if you are, he glowered, I don't see why you think that's convincing me. That's the thing. I won't do any of those. But you're putting in a motel. I beg your pardon, she sputtered. This is a bed and breakfast. There's a difference. He drew himself up so that she wouldn't miss his message. My family was one of the first pioneers to homestead in Sunnyridge, and I'm not about to let someone new like you ruin it for us. He paused to take a breath. I don't have anything against these kinds of places, but this is the wrong place to put one. I think this is the perfect spot, she cried. Everyone will want to see a real ranch in action. It would be so nice to be able to watch you riding your tractor at sunset. She drifted off dreamily and then blushed. He'd better snap her out of it right into reality. You must not be familiar with farm life, lady, or you wouldn't have stars in your eyes. The thus-mentioned eyes snapped from the daydream to a still lovely dark blue. There's manure to spread and flies get on everything. The cows stink to high heavens, and if you're unlucky, hay fever will get you. She crossed her arms over her chest. Doesn't bother me any. Doubt flicked over her face. I'm pretty sure. That's what you all say. The newcomers come out here liking all sorts of farm animals until a rooster comes crowing in their ear. She rolled her eyes. There's always earplugs. And I suppose you're going to sleep with nose plugs, too? She waved a hand dismissively. I'm sure I'll get used to everything. The woman was naive like a new calf. Listen, he said firmly. The last thing I want is some city slickers gawking at me in my tractor. He hadn't meant to be menacing, putting his hands on his hips, but the thought of all these outsiders coming in to wreak havoc on their small town was too much to bear. To his surprise, she took a step forward, so that they were practically nose to nose. A sweet fragrance tickled his senses. "Well, for your information," she said in an ornery voice, "this city slicker is not going to back down. I bought this place intending to make it a B&B, and I will do it, with or without your permission." Her eyes fairly smoldered now. Sheldon had been ready with a comeback. The words were just at the tip of his tongue, until he glanced down at her mouth, pursed with disapproval, plump and pink and perfect for kissing. Kissing? Holy smokes, what was he thinking? He blinked at the wayward thought and forced himself to look back into her eyes, but she herself was transfixed on his mouth. Swallowing, he dared another peek at her soft-looking lips. As though she'd lassoed him, an invisible force pulled him toward her, closer and closer, until at the very last moment she turned her head. "Pardon me," he breathed, taking a step back and feeling his face turn hot. They stared at each other, stunned for a long moment, and then she lifted her chin. "Don't worry. I will try to keep my dog and my guests out of your farm." With that, she coaxed the rib thief by the leash. They watched her get to her feet ever so slowly, yawn and move her short, stubby legs over the threshold. Then, and only then, did Althea Thompson slam the door in Sheldon's face. Striding away, he didn't allow himself to react until he was to his property, down the lane and into the front clearing. He burned with annoyance and confusion. He remembered the almost kiss, the longing he'd felt then and now as the memory washed over him. He rubbed his jaw, perplexed at the complicated feelings his beautiful but irritating new neighbor inspired in him. "Women," he muttered under his breath. "They're just plain trouble."
Chapter 5. Althea. Closing the front door and scuttling to the safety of her kitchen, Althea ran the back of her hand along her forehead. She felt warm, like she was catching a fever, and it was all thanks to that grumpy cowboy, that irritating, maddening, ruggedly attractive cowboy. She recalled the intense brown eyes that bored deep into hers, the scruff she desperately wanted to run her fingers over, and those lips that she'd wanted to kiss. What just happened on her porch? One moment they were sparring over her dream he'd condescendingly called a motel, and then the next she was nearly falling all over herself to get close to him. He had smelled good, of hay and sunshine and being outdoors. Just thinking about that almost kiss made her all hot and bothered again. "Stop it, Althea," she chastised herself. "He's the enemy. He doesn't want your dream to succeed." "He's such a pill," Althea told Bubbles as she continued to putter around the house. "Thinks he can simply wish me away and keep this small town small. Without tourism and other businesses, this place will shrivel up and die. I'll show him. I'm going to put my B&B on the map. He will regret he even fought it in the first place." She paused on her way down the hall. "First, I need to get the permit from P&Z. I wonder if all of them on there are crusty cowboys." Bubbles commiserated with her resting despair face. 2 weeks later, Althea showed up at a small concrete building which said City Hall over the front door. She had done her homework and had gotten on the planning and zoning agenda. Patting her hair down for strays, she entered through the glass doors. Earlier on the phone, a city employee instructed her to go to the council chambers, which she suspected was the room to the left, where she could hear voices. She plastered a smile on her face so she could make a favorable impression on her new neighbors. At least she could make friends with these ones, unlike a certain cowboy neighbor whom she had tried all week to avoid. When he'd passed her property as she was checking her mail in her milk gallon jug, she had done a quick about face so she didn't have to make eye contact. Another time, Bubbles tried to get onto his driveway, but luckily, Althea outmuscled her on the leash. Lastly, as the sun set, she avoided the window so that she didn't have to watch him drive his noisy tractor. So yes, she'd had some success avoiding him. She certainly didn't want him trying to talk her out of applying for the permit. At the city council chambers, she sailed in smiling, with all the confidence she could muster. All conversation came to a halt, and a half-dozen pairs of eyes turned her way, including a pair of brown eyes gazing at her with a wicked glint. Sheldon Brown's. And he was sitting up front, like he was part of this P&Z commission.
Chapter 6. Sheldon. It had taken all of Sheldon Brown's self-control to not laugh at the arrival of Althea Thompson. She looked so shocked he wished he could have taken a photo of her open-mouthed reaction to seeing him sitting up front like he had every right. Sheldon gave Althea a nod to show her he could set aside unneighborly feelings. "We want to welcome you all to the Sunnyridge Planning and Zoning meeting," he told the audience of 3. "I'm Sheldon Brown, and I'm the chair of the commission." Althea coughed into her hand, her eyes bulging. She then proceeded to give him a glare hotter than the asphalt in August before taking her seat right in the front row. Across the aisle from her was a couple, the Pitts, who lived on the other side of the town from Sheldon. "First item on the agenda is," he glanced at his sheet, "a zoning change for Peter and Marie Pitt." Peter Pitt shuffled up to the podium, followed by Marie, his second wife, who was at least 2 decades younger than him. Marie cracked gums so loudly one would have thought they'd mic'd the podium. Apart from anticipating seeing his neighbor once again, Sheldon had been dreading having to rule on this one. Legally, the Pitts had every right to change zoning, but these changes always gave Sheldon heartburn. He wanted to look Mr. Pitt in the eye and beg him to reconsider before farmland was all gone. He knew, looking at Mrs. Pitt II and her expensive appearance, that it would be a losing proposition. Developers sure made it hard for farmers to resist their offers. "Please say your name for the record." "You know who I am, but very well," Mr. Pitt said in a soft, irritated voice. "I am Peter Pitt, and I want to change the zoning of my land from agricultural to half-acre." Sheldon lobbed the first salvo. "Mr. Pitt, with all due respect," for Mr. Pitt was in his 90s, "your requested zoning does not fit the general plan." "We checked on it," Marie said, chewing even louder, "and it says that next to our property there's land zoned for apartments." Darla, the realtor's wife who sat on P&Z, spoke up. "It's true." Sheldon winced. Of course Darla would side with them. "Darla, would your husband be involved in the sale of this land if it is rezoned?" "I wish." Darla rolled her eyes. "But no." With a sinking feeling, Sheldon watched his chance to ask Darla to not vote on this disappear. "Do we have any questions on this?" he asked the other members of the commission. Ted and Walter both shook their heads, mumbling only that this was not good. Albert took a deep breath, giving Sheldon hope, but all he said was, "Nope," which left Sheldon with his turn. As anyone who follows the P&Z knows, we are here to apply the law, even though we might disagree with the ruling personally. Mr. Pitt, I played as a boy on your farmland. You and my pop have been friends for a long time. I wish the land could stay agricultural, but you have the right to use your land as you wish. However, I do believe I have some legal standing to say that the general plan recommends larger lots here, so I am going to move to deny the application." Mr. Pitt looked ashen. His mouth trembled. Sheldon looked away, his glance meeting Althea's. He flinched at the annoyance he read in her eyes. He shouldn't care, and he didn't need her approval, but it stung. Maybe he had hoped she would admire him for being an upstanding P&Z commissioner. Sheldon realized that no one had seconded his motion. He looked from one to another. Darla simply stared right back at him. The old-timers looked at their hands, folded in front of them. Seeing that the motion had no second, Sheldon admitted reluctantly, "It is no longer under consideration." "Wait," Mr. Pitt said. "What just happened?" "It means we might just get this, Petey," Marie said. Darla moved to approve the petition, which passed by a 4-to-1 vote, with Sheldon the lone nay vote.
Chapter 7. Althea. Althea almost felt sorry for Sheldon Brown, beaten at his own attempt at stopping growth by the rest of the commission. Grudgingly, she could tell that he took his job seriously, and that he had the guts to vote his conscience even though the others might not agree. Sheldon glanced at the agenda in front of him. It was an oddly cute mannerism. The last thing Althea expected this cowboy to be was studious. She wondered if he read the paper at night, with his feet put up on an ottoman shaped like a cow, or if he read books on Sundays in a hammock strung between grown trees. She pictured those large hands cradling a book like Where the Red Fern Grows, rubbing the soft top of a hound's head. Althea realized that the chamber was quiet. The rest of the commission was watching Sheldon. His words had trailed, and now he was gazing right back at her, Althea. Even Mr. Pitt had looked over his shoulder, probably wondering what was going on. Althea straightened up in her chair and glanced at her hands folded on her lap. Prim and proper, unlike what her heart was telling her to be. She needed to fight for her B&B against Dreamslayer over there. "Anyway, congratulations, Mr. Pitt," Sheldon said. "You got your petition approved." For a response, Mr. Pitt started coughing. After a few seconds of this violent action, Mr. Pitt clutched at the podium, looking deathly ill. Althea exchanged panicked glances with Sheldon. "Mr. Pitt," Sheldon said, glancing back at the man. "Are you all right?" Mr. Pitt spun at his heels and fell headfirst at Althea's feet. She gasped, joined by other alarmed voices in the room. Marie Pitt started screaming. "Somebody call 911, Althea said. The woman commissioner, Darla, was it, got up. "I'll do it," she said, running out to the hall. It had been eons since Althea had taken the babysitting course at the Red Cross, but the class was still ingrained in her mind. She knelt, turned the man to his back, and took a deep breath. She sensed a male presence to her right. Sheldon had come over and was looking at her. "Do you want to do it, or shall I?" "Have you done CPR before?" she asked. "On sick animals, yes," he said. He looked nervous. "I've done it once," she confessed, and she'd nearly botched it then. She was so scared. "Then go ahead and do it." She swallowed nervously, and then started administering chest compressions. Marie started crying. Sheldon stood and put an arm around her. It felt like hours, but it was probably only minutes. Althea said a prayer under her breath that the man wouldn't die. When his chest started moving once again, and she felt a weak pulse at his neck, Althea's body shook from delayed shock. Mr. Pitt's wife cried some more, just as a swarm of firefighters entered the room. Althea was so relieved to be able to turn Mr. Pitt over to them. "What is this all about?" A now conscious Mr. Pitt asked feebly. "Sir," said one fireman, "you collapsed, and thanks to the quick actions of a brave citizen." Everyone looked at Althea. "He helped too." She pointed to Sheldon modestly. "You are alive. Just to be on the safe side, we'll take you to the ER. "But what about my zoning permit?" Mr. Pitt asked. "We have all the information we need," Sheldon interjected. "For now, take care of your health, Mr. Pitt." Mr. Pitt relaxed and let the firefighters help him onto the hospital stretcher, and they hauled him off, trailed by his wife. "Well," a gray-haired little man at the commission table said, once everyone was seated again. "That was exciting." His nameplate said, Albert Rowberry. "Just a little." Sheldon shot a glance at Althea before relaxing into the tiniest smile. "Thank you for your quick thinking." Althea's cheeks felt warm. "You're the one who appointed me." "Don't be so modest," Darla said, her expression admiring. "Way to tell us to call 911. Broke us out of that deer-in-the-headlights look." "And you actually did the CPR. Whew. Whatever you need from the commission, it's granted." Sheldon winced. "Not exactly how things work, but I do believe that Miss Thompson is up next on the agenda." Althea, still shaken from the incident, approached the podium. Sheldon sat back down at the U-shaped table and murmured, "If you need a few minutes to collect yourself." "I'm okay," Althea lied, her heart still beating fast. "Just go easy on me." Their glances crossed and held. Sheldon looked away first with a little nod. Miss Thompson is here to ask for a conditional use permit for a B&B at the house located at Riverdale Lane. The old Farland house, Albert said. Why, she's your neighbor. Yes, Sheldon admitted. Well then, Mr. Brown, Darla drawled with a wicked grin, I dare say you should recuse yourself.
Chapter 8. Sheldon. Sheldon didn't like the helpless feeling that took over him when he stood to recuse himself, but it was the right thing to do. The last thing he wanted was for Althea Thompson to not get a fair hearing, though he very much wanted a certain outcome. As casually as he could, he made his way to a seat in the empty front row. Althea glanced at him coolly, then turned back to the rest of the commission. For 1 minute the group was in a tizzy trying to appoint a chair pro tem, choosing Darla. Her eyes flashed with triumph. She was a go-getter of a woman. He wouldn't be surprised if she ran for mayor herself someday. "State your name for the record, please," Darla said. Her expression and tone were warm. Sheldon had a sinking feeling that with Darla at the helm and Althea's heroism, she would easily clinch this approval. "Althea Thompson. And what would you like to do with this property?" Althea didn't answer right away. She took a deep breath and looked each of the commissioners in the eye, even Sheldon. Then she turned to the commission once again. "I would like to turn it into a bed and breakfast." Darla's eyes lit up as Sheldon expected. Albert and the 2 other old-timers on the commission grumbled inaudibly. "Really?" Darla said. "Tell us more." Althea's posture relaxed. Sheldon studied her attractive figure for a minute as she briefly described her plan. She had a distracting habit of cocking one leg and letting her sandal flop to the floor, her right hip angled higher than the other. He returned his attention to the discussion. "I don't see why we should have one more motel in these parts," Albert said. "Do we really get that many tourists around here? There's that truck stop already at the freeway exit." "This would attract a different sort of tourist, I hope," Althea said. "They'll come here for the total experience." Albert raised a bushy eyebrow. "And what experience is that, young lady?" "The farming country experience." Albert snorted. "Farming? Bah! Nothing to see here. Move along." "I beg to differ," Darla said. "It's true what Miss Thompson is saying. This is the real deal out here, and people will pay big bucks to experience it." "So?" Albert said crossly. "All the money will go to her. A lot of good that will do our town." "But just think, Albert," Darla said. "You will get people stopping at the gas station for gas and snacks, and for sure the diner for their meals, the grocery store to get picnic stuff." Albert didn't look convinced, but he didn't disagree either. Sheldon hoped the other old-timers would speak up, but they didn't, as they usually did. "Besides," Darla said, unleashing more ammo, "you saw what this young lady did. Wouldn't you want her to stay and run a successful business in Sunnyridge? Why, she could even join our volunteer fire department." "Thanks," Althea said, chuckling, "but I think a B&B will be enough to keep me busy." Sheldon looked at Albert and tried to telepathically send him a message, but Albert simply looked at Althea morosely. "I heard from the grapevine that you moved from the city," Darla told Althea. "That's right." "I did too some 20 years ago, and I'm still the outsider." Darla winked. "What did you do there?" "I was an accountant." "Oh," Darla nodded. "So you also have a good sense of business." "I like to think so," Althea smiled. After this love fest, Darla made a show of getting votes. It was obvious she was bent on approving the B&B, or whatever this was. Sheldon itched to raise his arm to object. Instead, he shook his head in frustration. That's what all the newcomers did. Come into the town and change things to their liking instead of leaving them well enough alone. "I move that we approve the permit," Darla said, looking around. Second, one of the old-timers said. Wait! Everyone turned to look at the blonde woman standing at the doorway. She ran up to Althea and clutched her arm. I object, Your Honor. You do? Althea said. What? Darla frowned. Sorry I'm late, the woman said. Traffic. Anywho, weren't you disapproving her permit? As a matter of fact, Darla said, we were about ready to approve it. Phew! The woman waved a tissue. I was about ready to cry and beg for you to give it to her. And who would you be? Darla asked. Her realtor. The woman put an arm around Althea's shoulders. I got her into this predicament in the first place. I was ready to own up to it. Darla smiled stiffly. Thank you for your professional enthusiasm, Miss... Noelle Collins. Miss Collins, but it's totally unnecessary. Darla called for the voting to commence once again. It was hard to figure out Albert. He looked about half asleep, but he raised his hand along with Darla to approve the B&B. So did the rest of the commission. Sheldon stood sour like a gallon of milk left out all day. He didn't like this, not one little bit. As he passed Althea on his way back to the commissioner's table, he was sure she would rub in her victory by giving him a snide smile. And he was right. Not only that, but did she just stick her tongue out at him? She won this round fair and square, he had to give her that. But make no mistake, she'd better watch her B&B, or she'd be hearing from him.
Chapter 9. Althea. Why on earth did you pick this forsaken place? Chrissy asked as Althea drove the U-Haul down Main Street the following weekend. Althea didn't expect any less from her older sister. Chrissy had a habit of talking Althea out of most things, including that time in high school when Althea had a crush on a nerdy guy in math class, and Althea wanted to ask him out to Girls' Choice. Chrissy's words were, "He's way too boring for you." By the time Althea had dithered, Sylvia McManus beat her to the asking. The mousy Sylvia continued to date Greg the rest of their senior year. Greg got braces and contacts, and suddenly, he wasn't so boring anymore. Althea was slow to forgive her sister for the missed opportunity. Doesn't it have its own charm? Althea asked Chrissy. Charm is code word for podunk. Sunnyridge isn't that, and you know it. Chrissy peered down the street at the grocery store and Mexican restaurant, the credit unions, the hardware store, and sniffed with disapproval. It is too. Where's the nearest mall? I have no idea, Althea admitted. Probably Colorado Springs? Heavens, that's a drive. You act like that's such a bad thing. If I don't get my big store fix, then life ain't worth living. Althea could believe it. Chrissy was a clothes hog, and she routinely shopped for full outfits even though her closets in the house she was living in by herself were getting fuller by the minute. They were such opposites. Even now, looking at Chrissy wearing a tunic in her usual bombastic red, she couldn't help but wonder how they came from the same set of parents. Chrissy used to say they were adopted, and for a long time, Althea seriously believed that. You're running out of closet space, Althea pointed out. I know, I'm going to need someone to make me bigger closets. Althea sighed. I don't think that's the solution, sis. So tell me, Chrissy said, ignoring her last comment. Why did you want to ditch your secure job for a B&B that could go under in the first year? Althea smiled sweetly. You're such an optimist. I read it somewhere. Oh, wait. Maybe that statistic was for a restaurant in its first year, but still, it's similar. You know, it's always been a dream of mine. I also wanted to be a trapeze artist when I was younger. Chrissy rolled her eyes. It's too late to talk me out of it. I finally got the permit the other day. Althea thought back to the P&Z meeting, Sheldon's stern expression, and the heroic act that launched Althea into the papers the next day. You better have, Chrissy said, considering all the trouble you had to go through to get it. It wasn't trouble, Althea said lightly. I just did what any reasonable human being would have done in the same situation. Uh-huh, not me. Chrissy held up a perfectly manicured nail and shook her head. Can you imagine? What if the guy had a contagious disease? What if? Althea shrugged. I couldn't just let him die. No, I'd have let someone else play hero. Not all of us have to be heroes, Althea agreed. Not that I was angling for that. Trouble with you, Althea, is you are always playing hero to someone. As if... Althea gripped the steering wheel. As if what? As if... Nothing. Chrissy was looking out the window as they exited Main Street and turned onto a side road leading several minutes later to her future B&B and Sheldon Brown's property. Althea pressed her lips together, choosing to remain silent. She was sure Chrissy was going to say that Althea was trying to exercise her mothering instinct. She started to count to 10. Minutes later, their spat was averted, and the two sisters were back to ribbing each other. Are you still dating Ronald? Althea asked. You mean Robert? Oops, sorry. Yes, but it's not looking promising. He's into clothes way more than me. Sounds like a match made in heaven. There's room for only one person in my mirror. Althea cast a curious glance at her sister. Althea was as self-conscious about her inability to have babies as Chrissy was about being a big woman. But Chrissy didn't look bummed. She looked secure in her own self. Good for her. Maybe we can introduce you to one of the locals, Althea said. Speaking of which, the U-Haul passed a familiar-looking truck, and what was fast becoming a familiar frown. Ah, that was my neighbor, Althea said. Yeah, he's single, and no, I'm not interested. You should get your head examined, sister. Chrissy chased after the truck with a backward glance. Why should I? The guy hates my B&B idea. He equates it with a dinky little motel. Althea shuddered. Isn't that what a B&B is? You offer a bed and feed people breakfast? You know very well that a B&B is a nicer version of a motel. Maybe he doesn't know that. This place seems very insulated from reality. Chrissy leaned close to her window and stared at the side mirror. The guy just did a U-turn and is following us. Althea confirmed her sister's announcement in the rearview mirror. Odd. Maybe he's on his way over to ask you out on a date. I'm pretty sure a date is the last thing on his mind. He probably wants to talk to me about the fence he wants to erect between our properties. That sounds so romantic, Chrissy gushed. Are you for real? Well, you two could pine for each other in your fortresses until one day he comes to slay the dragon that's guarding your tower. Althea frowned. Not if he built the wall to begin with. She shook her head in exasperation. Her sister had such an active imagination. But as Althea pulled into the dirt lot that made up her parking, she did wonder what Sheldon's intentions were. There he was, parking after her and getting out of his vehicle. That's some buckle, Chrissy said, drooling like bubbles on a good day. Howdy, cowboy. Althea shot her a frustrated glance. Chrissy wasn't helping the situation any. The last thing she wanted was to make friends with this small-town redneck. Sheldon smiled, his features softening. That moment of a near kiss the first time they met came back to Althea in full force. She was glad no one could read her thoughts, especially her sister, or she'd never hear the end of it. Howdy, he said back. I take it it's move-in day. Yes, Chrissy said, and we'd love your help. She nudged Althea. Wouldn't we? It depends, Althea said. Don't you have developers to badger? The corners of his eyes crinkled with amusement. I haven't sighted any yet today. Chrissy was giving Althea a perplexed glance. Good, Althea said. She gave up on trying to shake the guy off. Maybe he was feeling guilty about knocking her dream the other day. He could help her move, but that was all. Hey, Bubbles, he said as Althea let the basset out the back passenger seat. And he loves dogs, Chrissy mouthed as Althea shook her head and unlocked the back of the truck. I hope you don't mind, Sheldon said as he straightened up. I called my brothers to see if anyone was available to help. You have more than one of you? Chrissy looked like she was about to pass out from all this awesomeness. Yes'm. Chrissy's mouth made a little O. I do believe this small town is starting to grow on me. Althea shrugged off her sister's silliness and went to work. She felt funny about letting her enemy touch her things, have a glimpse at her belongings. It was almost like letting him go through her underwear drawer. Speaking of which, a bra must have escaped the drawer, and Althea hurried and whipped it off the truck floor, tucking it as best she could in her pocket. After several minutes, Althea had to reluctantly admit to herself that it was nice to have Sheldon's help. They made good time bringing in the boxes that quickly filled up the main living space on the first floor. Althea wasn't sure where she was storing anything, so she asked her helpers to keep them in the commons areas for now. "Are you sure?" Chrissy asked. "It'll save you time in the long run for you to put everything in its place right away. I need to paint some rooms, recarpet, that kind of thing, so I need to keep the rooms clear of stuff." The sound of trucks driving onto the lot roused Althea's attention. She glanced out the window and was quickly hemmed in by Chrissy. 5. He has 5 brothers? What do they do that they could get away on a weekday? Are they all billionaires or something? I wish. Sheldon caught that last part and was chuckling. We all kind of work for ourselves, so it's easy enough to get away. They were all handsome, with their own brand of attractiveness. Althea looked at them like she expected Chrissy was, probably overwhelmed by all that cowboy charm. There was, in order of birth, Patrick, Dylan, Sheldon, Heath, Chandler, and McCoy. "Oh, dear," Chrissy said, looking from one to the other. "It'll take me a while to remember your names, but it's nice to meet you all." There was a collective drawl of nice to meet you replies. The cowboys filed out to the U-Haul and heaved all the large stuff between them. Althea had little to do but to get out of the way and direct them as best as she could where they could set the furniture. Once in a while, she and Sheldon ran into each other, resulting in an awkward dance. "Excuse me, pardon me," he said, reaching out at least once to steady her. His fingers were warm and strong, and definitely an unwelcome sensation. At least that's what Althea had to tell herself, because the cowboy was no friend, that much she knew. And if he couldn't even be a friend, how could she promote him to love interest?
Chapter 10. Sheldon. Sheldon and his brothers brought the last of the stuff into the building. Althea had colorful taste in furniture. There were couches in a bright blue, chairs in red, and a table painted yellow. The furniture was a lot like its owner, bright, cheery, and eye-catching. Not that he was looking. He bent down to scratch behind Bubbles' ear. She lay just outside the front door, only her eyes moving as she tracked everyone's movement back and forth. "You being a good girl, Bubbles?" he asked, scratching the top of her head. "Not going to run off on your mom today?" A step slowed near him. He looked up to see Patrick watching with an amused expression. "You trying to make up with her through her dog?" "Not trying to make up for anything," Sheldon protested. "I heard about what went down at the P&Z. She saved old Pitt's life is what I heard." "That she did." "Well then, she's a keeper. She won't have anything to do with me if she can help it." "I wouldn't either," Patrick smirked. "Heard about you making a big stink about denying her permit, but this is a good chance for you to do a do-over. We could invite her to Sunday dinner." "No." "Why ever not, Sheldon?" Patrick gazed out Althea's front yard. "That seems mighty unchristian-like of you." Sheldon sighed. "It has nothing to do with being kind on the Sabbath. I just know that she and I don't see eye to eye, so I shouldn't aggravate it further by forcing my company on her." "Who said it's all about you?" Patrick's light gray eyes danced. They were silver, almost like Mom's. "I think it's just appropriate for us to get to know our new neighbor, even though you're the closest one to her property." Sheldon's chest tightened with panic. "It's a terrible idea. She'll probably work her charm on the rest of you just to get back at me." Patrick raised an eyebrow. "She doesn't seem to have a conspiratorial bone in her body." He looked back into the house, where Chandler was talking to Althea about the stair rail. Part of it had been knocked off, and Chandler was giving Althea some pointers, and an offer to come back to fix it. Sheldon's eyes followed Chandler's gaze, then he wrenched it away from Althea. "Admit it, Sheldon," his brother needled. "You're attracted to her." Sheldon gritted his teeth and muttered, "So what if I am? I don't need to act on it." "Think about what Pop said. He wants to see us all settled. starting with you and Winnie, Patrick." Patrick shoved his hands in his pockets. "Actually, Winnie and I aren't on the best of terms right now. She's irked that I'm taking off again soon for some jackpot riding. I told her I'm trying to build our future, but she wouldn't listen." "Maybe you need to start listening to her." "This isn't about her and me, but you and our newcomer here." "Lay off, will ya?" Sheldon tried to say lightheartedly, but he just sounded peeved. "I won't bug you about Winnie if you don't bug me about this imaginary thing you're accusing me of." Patrick just smiled, hooked his thumbs on his belt loops, and whistled on into the house. Down the road, a cloud of dust was stirred up by the arrival of Dylan's 7-year-old daughter on her bike. "Hey, Tater Tot," he called out her nickname. "Hey, Uncle Sheldon." She put the brakes on. "Looking good on that bike." Sheldon strolled over to the railing. "Watch, Uncle Sheldon, watch." She pedaled backwards for a couple of seconds. "Did you see that?" "Sure did." She looked so happy. She always had been, even though she grew up orphaned by her mom at an early age. "Is your neighbor moving in?" she asked, looking into the house. "Yep. Want to come say hi?" "Sure." She carefully set her kickstand up, walked up the porch, and came over to Bubbles. "Is this her dog? It's so pretty." Sheldon nodded. "She's a girl, and her name's Bubbles." Tater's face lit up. "Cute name. I love her already." She hugged the dog, who luckily didn't mind the loving. Dylan came out. "Hey, Tater. Are you all done with your chores like I asked?" "Of course." Tater's sassiness reminded Sheldon of her mom's when she was alive. "Who's this?" Althea came out onto the porch and was looking at Tater. "Hi!" Tater jumped to her feet and put out her hand. "I'm Dylan's daughter, Tabitha Brown. Tater Tot for long." Althea laughed, a pretty sound that tugged at Sheldon's heart. He avoided looking at his brothers. He was sure they were watching his reaction. "Nice to meet you, Miss Tater Tot." The girls shook hands. "Nope, just Tater Tot." "Sorry." Althea continued to smile, looking around at the motley crew gathered around her porch and the little girl, sneaking a glance at Sheldon when she thought he wasn't looking. Not that he was sneaking glances at her either. Chrissy came out and was introduced too. "Your dog's sweet." Tater crouched down and loved on Bubbles once again. Althea petted the basset's head. "She is, isn't she?" Sheldon's gaze met Dylan's. Sheldon knew how much Dylan wanted to somehow make it up to Tater, her having lost her mom, and how a caring woman seemed to be a magnet for Tater. "I figured out how much wood we'd need," Chandler announced as he joined them on the porch. "I can get that fixed for you in a day or two." Sheldon started. What was going on with his harebrained family? They were all rallying around Althea like she was already part of the fold. Even the usually reticent Heath had jumped into the conversation around Bubbles, which was so unlike Heath. Usually he had nothing good to say about anything but Labrador retrievers. "I suppose if you're all done here, we'd best be on our way." Sheldon attempted an exit. "Oh, but you mustn't," Althea protested. "Not without your trying my cinnamon rolls." "Cinnamon rolls?" Sheldon's Adam's apple bobbed up and down. He normally didn't have a sweet tooth, but he did have a weakness for cinnamon rolls. "It'll be such a bother," he said. "Oh, but it isn't." Her eyes shone either out of gratitude or amusement at his discomfort, he couldn't tell. "In fact, it should be ready about now. Can you not smell it?" And indeed he could, as his brothers must have. They filed like hounds into the house, lured by the scent. "Won't you have some, Sheldon?" Althea was looking at him, half turned at the door. He was sure she was doing this just to needle him. He didn't want to give in, but it would look pretty odd if he stayed out on the porch by himself like some sore loser. Besides, the rolls did smell so good. "I'll try one." He kept his expression neutral. "I made enough for seconds, and thirds." She turned and walked on in, as though daring him to take it or leave it. With everyone giving her some room, Althea produced a pan of the most gooey-looking cinnamon rolls and set it on some Teflon table protectors on the island. The whole gang watched her cut the rolls. She gave the first one to Tater, who licked her lips loudly, producing a cute, happy smile that was contagious. Even Sheldon relaxed some, closing his eyes after the first heavenly bite. The rolls were warm, messy, and delicious. Althea poured little mismatched glasses of milk and they drank it up, following up with seconds. McCoy set down his second roll and pursed his lips for a minute. Althea took one look at him and cried, "Is the roll burnt?" "No, ma'am," McCoy said. He swallowed visibly. "Mom always made cinnamon rolls Sunday mornings." "Oh." Understanding crossed Althea's face. "Does she not bake anymore?" She's no longer with us," Patrick said. "She's in heaven with my mom," Tater volunteered. Althea blinked. "Well, that's a really nice place to be with someone." Behind her, her sister was openly sniffling. "Ain't it?" Tater said. "Isn't it?" Dylan corrected. "She knew what I meant. Isn't it though, Aunt Althea?" Aunt Althea. Gee, Tater was going to get them all in trouble. Everyone turned to Dylan, who was smiling. First CPR, now cinnamon rolls. Was there nothing this woman couldn't do to win them over? Sheldon felt like he was a gunslinger in a losing fight.
Chapter 11. Althea. The Brown family sure was lovely, Althea thought to herself in the days following their help on her move. Well, except for that Sheldon, who still hung back and acted like she was unwelcome. Fortunately, Tater was so cute and made up for her uncle's boorishness. She'd been by since, showing off new moves on her bike, telling Althea proudly about doing well in school that day, and sometimes simply petting Bubbles. Kids. She took a deep breath and sighed, how she wanted them in her life badly. Too bad Heavenly Father didn't think she should have any of her own biologically. She wondered if Sheldon Brown liked kids too. He was especially sweet to his niece, that was obvious. He seemed like a great uncle, his eyes softening as he looked upon Tater. Althea shrugged, off the good feeling. It wouldn't do her any good to fall for her neighbor. Sure, he'd thawed a little, but everyone knew that Sheldon Brown was rooting for her dream to fail. The phone rang, and she picked it up while in the middle of putting away plates in a cleaned-out cupboard. "Is this Althea Thompson?" a female voice asked. "Yes, it is. This is Winnie Rivers, Patrick Brown's girlfriend." "Oh," she replied in surprise. How odd that she would get such a call from out of the blue. "Nice to meet you. Anyway, Patrick mentioned that you're all moved into your place, and we wondered if you'd like to join us for dinner sometime." "That's really nice of you to ask," Althea said with a prickle of pleasure. The Brown brothers sure were fast becoming a blessing in her life, except one. "I would love to." "Great. Sundays are usually best for us around here. Would this coming weekend work for you?" "Sure. What can I bring?" "The guys told me you bake wonderful cinnamon rolls. Do you have a baked good that could go with the roast? How about some homemade butter rolls?" "I can already taste it. Yum! Yes, please." She had to ask, "Is there anyone else coming?" "Well," Winnie hedged, "we were thinking of inviting Sheldon over, but we haven't asked him yet." Althea bristled inside. So, that was what this was all about. Everyone thought they knew better for her. But at the same time, she had no right to keep Winnie and Patrick from inviting who they wanted to this dinner. She didn't say anything, just thought of how the evening might turn all awkward. As it was, Althea put the dinner out of her mind as she stayed pretty busy during the week. As promised, Chandler came over to help fix the stair rail once and for all. He also gave her pointers for around the house. He got super excited talking about repair work. "How do you know how to do all this?" Althea marveled. "That's what I do." He grinned, his gleaming dark eyes in positivity, buoying her up. "I build cabinets mostly, but I'll build anything anyone asks of me. Even a barn, as long as I can figure out how to do it. Normally I'm busy, but I've hit a slow time, and so I'm happy to help where I can here." "I certainly am willing to pay you." Sure, materials would be fine, nothing else. Like I said, I enjoy it. On the appointed Sunday, she came down the stairs to the ring of the doorbell, her fingers sliding smoothly over the fixed banister. To her astonishment, who should be standing there on the porch but Sheldon Brown? "Winnie asked me to fetch you," he said, looking uncomfortable. "You didn't need to inconvenience yourself," she said, though she instantly regretted her shrewish words. "I didn't," he assured her with a polite smile. He was dressed in a cowboy version of Sunday best, which consisted of a long-sleeved white shirt, a vest, clean jeans, a bolo tie, and a scuffed but manure-free pair of boots. He held his hat in his hand, and his longish hair curled slightly around his ears. He looked real good, truth be told. "Well, thank you," she said, hoping she sounded more sincere than she felt. "Let me grab the rolls." "Do you need a hand? Maybe just get the door?" She called for Bubbles from the little kennel in the back. "Time to come in, girlie." The pup had been doing better staying close to home, mostly napping in the shade of the porch, especially with the warming weather, but Althea still liked to keep a close eye on her. Althea had rigged a little chain-link fence in the back from pre-made materials she bought from the local hardware store. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was better than worrying about Bubbles wandering off and stealing ribs off a cowboy's porch or getting caught by the dog catcher. Bubbles got up, stretched and yawned, and took her time to make it inside. "You ought to consider building a fence around the back for your dog," Sheldon suggested. Her cheeks warmed from embarrassment. "I would love one, but finances are a bit tight right now. Maybe when I start getting guests." Sheldon glanced thoughtfully at Bubbles, like the cogs were working under that cowboy hat, but he didn't say any more about it. Even though him picking her up felt like a date, Althea vowed that it wasn't one. She did let Sheldon get her truck door, like a gentleman should. "Where does Winnie live?" Althea asked as she got in his side of the truck. "Down on Main Street, in a house that used to be her grandma's. She's done a lot of work on it." "Interesting." "Just wait until you see it. You and she seem to have the same taste for bright colors." He reached for his key and then hesitated. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you since that P&Z meeting." Althea looked at him warily. "Okay." He took a minute to start the engine and drove the truck out of her property. "I apologize that we got off on the wrong foot. I shouldn't have let my temper get the better of me. There was no reason for me to be rude to you, even though I might not agree with what you're doing to this property." "So you still disapprove?" she jabbed back. "I see how much of your heart you're putting into this. You obviously believe in this dream. I have a lot of respect for that." She teared up and looked away. "I've always wanted this since I was a little girl, but my parents wanted me to have a safety net kind of career. They talked me into accounting. I was good at it and even kind of liked it, but it was shriveling up my soul, you know?" He nodded. "So I took a chance when I saw this property for sale. You're probably going to think it's some sort of hocus pocus, but I seriously think God answered my prayers." "Well," he drawled, "he didn't answer mine." She gasped and folded her arms across her chest. "Sorry," he said, not looking very repentant. "I was just teasing." She turned and looked out the window. Yeah, sure. What a fool she was to open her heart to him, and all he cared about was being snarky and mean. She should have known better. Though it was hard to ignore him, sitting next to her as he drove the truck through town, ignore him she did. It seemed to take forever before he was slowing down in front of an older home that had great bones. It appeared to be from the Victorian era, with rounded turrets and intricate accents on the pretty blue woodwork. This time, Althea didn't wait for Sheldon to open her door. Clutching the pan of rolls, she let herself out. "Althea," Sheldon said, but she pretended she couldn't hear him call out. With blossoms falling from cherry trees, the grass was covered with a soft layer of petals. Like a kid, Althea kicked at them, wishing that her place could have such a nice yard too. Someday. The front door opened to the sight of a beautiful redhead with long legs encased in a gorgeous pair of orange and turquoise boots. "Hello! Come on to the back. I'll meet you there." Althea preceded Sheldon down a little path and along the wall where flowering bushes were starting to bloom. She tried to walk fast. The last thing she wanted was for Sheldon to catch up to her and try to apologize again. Thankfully, he made no such attempt. She couldn't wait to get this dinner over with. Thank goodness they would have another couple to diffuse their awkward situation. But as they approached the nicely laid-out table settings on the glass-topped patio table, shaded by what looked like a 100-year-old tree, Althea noticed only 3 plates. "Patrick not comin'?" Sheldon's voice was soft, unsurprised. "Nope." Winnie's eyes were bright, but Althea could tell she was upset. "What's his excuse this time?" Sheldon asked. "He went up to Oregon for a rodeo at the last minute." Winnie straightened out a bowl of chips. "I didn't even fight him on it. I really don't care anymore." Althea stood to the side, not understanding the full details, though she could easily pick up the undercurrents going on in the conversation. She had already liked Winnie for her friendly invitation. This just made her even more sympathetic. "Anyway," Winnie flashed a 100-watt smile. She could see why Patrick would fall head over heels for her. "Enough of that. Nice to meet you." "Thanks for having me." "Of course." Winnie studied Althea and then Sheldon. "Something wrong?" "No," Althea lied, even though she still felt pretty riled. Winnie pursed her lips and glanced at Sheldon. "You mind helping me take some stuff out?" "I can help too," Althea offered. "Just make yourself at home," Winnie said. "We've got this."
Chapter 12. Sheldon. Winnie whirled upon Sheldon as soon as they were in her kitchen. "Why does she look upset?" He grimaced. "I said something not so nice in the truck." She stared at him. "I sent you over to help you guys get to know each other better, not get on each other's nerves." He rubbed his nape. "I know, I shouldn't have teased her." She narrowed her eyes. "What exactly did you say?" "She said the Farland property was God's answer to her prayers. I told her it wasn't an answer to mine." "Sheldon Brown, you didn't." "I did, knucklehead that I was." "Why would you say that?" "Well, I don't want a bed and breakfast or whatever you call it springing up next to my fields." "As if that is so bad." He didn't argue. He'd done enough of that with a brown-haired beauty. "Did you apologize?" Winnie asked. He nodded glumly, but she wouldn't listen. "I wouldn't either." She took a bowl of potato salad from the fridge and shoved it in his hands. "You and your brother, both so frustrating." And then she stormed out. Sheldon could already tell this was going to be the dinner party of the century. Both women were now upset with him. Althea wouldn't look at him, and Winnie appeared capable of murder with that butter knife. He wondered if he should make their job easier and sit in the corner with a dunce cap on. "So," Winnie asked Althea, "what do you think of Sunnyridge so far?" "It's taking some getting used to, all this quiet, but overall I'm liking it." Winnie flashed a sympathetic smile. "I know what you mean. I was living in the country too, but even Sunnyridge can get almost too country for me." "How'd you end up here?" "I meant I came back to Sunnyridge. This is my grandma's place." "Oh, right. Sheldon said so." Sheldon was honored that they remembered his presence. Their sour expressions said he should be. Once they got back to some more female bonding, Sheldon amused himself by taking out the sautéed onions from his burger. He looked up to find Althea watching him. A blush crept onto his cheeks. "Changed my mind," he said. Then it was back to being ignored. Finally, after an interminable hour, Winnie pushed back her chair. "Well, thanks for joining us for dinner." She was looking at Althea, who thanked her. "That was really good," Sheldon said. "Tell Patrick he missed out." "You can tell your brother." Winnie's smile was brittle. Following Althea to the truck, Sheldon felt monumentally sorry for himself and Patrick. They both just couldn't get their act together. Patrick was a fool taking Winnie for granted. As for Sheldon, maybe his glib jokes served a purpose. Could be he was running scared of getting close to another woman, getting his heart broken all over again. It was just as well that he and Althea stayed strangers. He drove the truck onto her lot, put the gear in park, and killed the engine. He didn't dare come out to open her door unless she indicated that his gesture would be welcome. He was afraid to look at her, but he snuck a peek. She was sitting there looking like she needed to get something off her chest. He braced himself. "Thanks for the ride," she began. "You are welcome." She looked down at her hands folded on her lap. "And I can appreciate your honesty." It was a dumb joke. He wondered how many more times he should apologize. "You meant it, I could tell." She glared at him. "Maybe I did," he admitted. "With that out of the way, I just have one request then. Stay in your lane, and I'll stay in mine." Sheldon swallowed with difficulty. He'd never felt this sorry about losing something he never had to begin with. He heard what she said, but he wasn't sure what it truly meant. Did it mean he shouldn't talk to her at all? Ignore her at the grocery store? He had so many questions. "Okay," he said, despite his confusion. "That's it?" she said, her nostrils flaring. "Just okay?" His frustration spilled over. "What would you like me to say?" She blew out a breath. "How about I promise to stay out of your way and to stop wishing ill on your dream?" "Because that simply is not true, the wishing ill part." Her shoulders slumped. "I wish I could believe that." "I'm not that petty. I know when I'm beat. All my family thinks you're the best thing since sliced bread." "Your family..." She put a hand to her head, like she had a migraine coming on. "They're sweet, but they need to stop." "On their behalf, I apologize. I don't even know what they're trying to do, to be honest." "Me neither." He ran his palm on his worn steering wheel. "I think they're hoping we'll fall in love." "Ridiculous," she scoffed. "Extremely," he agreed. They both looked at each other at the same time. Her expression was uncertain, conflicted, like he felt. And then a wall went up and she glanced away. His foolish heart squeezed painfully. This was probably the last time she would ever sit in his truck next to him. "We're really good at adjectives, or adverbs, or both." A ghost of a smile appeared on her face. He scratched his head. "I can't tell them apart, but yes." "Thank goodness we're not very good at falling apart." Her voice was soft, alluring. He wanted to lean close to hear it better, but he stayed frozen on his side. "Uh-huh," was all he could say. Her smile faltered. She cleared her throat and looked away. "Good. I'm glad that's settled." Was it? To his surprise, she continued sitting in the truck like she was good with him opening her door for her. So he got out, opened her door, and offered his hand to help her out. She took it and jumped out, landing on the ground next to him, her shoes making a little crunch on the dirt. He held her hand a little longer than probably was necessary, catching a tantalizing whiff of sweet shampoo. She lifted her face, and he could only stare at the pretty blush that spread across her cheeks. He stepped back, feeling sucker-punched. Her words reverberated in his head about them staying in their own lanes. What if they both lived on the same lane? Did the rule still apply? They walked in silence, side by side. He was trying to think of a way to convince her that she and he could stay neighbor friends, or at least no longer active enemies. But other than planning and zoning, he couldn't think of a truly legitimate reason to get together with her. They'd reached the porch, and she turned to him at her door. "If Bubbles comes over," she said with a little smile, "just send her back with another serving of ribs." He nodded at her little joke and watched her go in and the door shutting. Stuffing his hands in his pockets, he turned and headed for his truck. He should be glad. She was bringing on the ruin of his small town. She was stubborn and oversensitive. Yes, it was just as well that he'd never see her again. He climbed into his truck cab and started the engine. The soon-to-be B&B sat looking forlorn, but everything was budding all around it, starting to get color. What had previously been barren flower beds had some decorations in them now. Giant metal flowers, a shepherd's crook with a bird feeder, an old chair with a hint of blue paint. It wasn't until that moment that he realized how much he'd been looking forward to color that spring. Althea Thompson promised all that, but he wouldn't be part of any of it.
Chapter 13. Althea. Althea first noticed them on her scalp, in her ear, and they had also burrowed down under collar. "What in the world, Bubbles?" she said, slapping at her head to relieve the burning itch. Bubbles raised her eyes briefly, then returned to her nap. She looked around as she knelt on her rubber mat in the flower beds next to 3 root balls of rose bushes, but she couldn't see any bugs. It was annoying since she still had some work ahead of her, planting in the beds. But whatever it was biting her was driving her nuts. "It's the no-see-ums." Althea turned to see Tater bike onto her driveway with the helmet and her school backpack on. "Hey there." "Hi." Tater flashed her signature smile. "They're no-see-ums. The bugs that make you itch." She unclipped her bike helmet and scratched under it. Althea patted her ear. "Makes sense. I guess I better put on some bug spray." "You can try, but it doesn't really work." "Oh dear, do they fly around the whole summer?" "Nope." Tater plopped down on the dirt beside Althea. "When it gets super hot, they die off." "And when is that?" "Around Mother's Day." Althea frowned. "That's still a ways from now." "My dad wears pantyhose." "What?" Althea gaped at the little girl. "So the no-see-ums don't get him." "Oh." Althea pictured Dylan Brown with a stocking leg on his head and chuckled. "You got some? Try it." "I don't know." Althea had to think. "I don't usually wear pantyhose, but I can look. Can I come in with you?" "Sure." Tater followed Althea into her bedroom, and she was glad that the boxes that she'd started out with were already put away. Slowly but surely, the house was looking more put together. She'd stripped the wallpaper in her bedroom next to the kitchen, and she was on to the second room. Digging in her drawer, she was excited to find a pair of pantyhose from her early days at the accounting firm, when she tried to look more corporate. She came out brandishing the hose and paused in the hallway to listen to Tater's conversation with Bubbles. "Daddy's been looking for a horse for me, Bubbles, now that I'm old enough to be in 4-H. Isn't that exciting?" Smiling, Althea joined them. "Look what I found." She waggled her fingers in the soft material. "Yay!" Tater stood and tugged at her hand. "Cut each leg off and let's try it." A bit skeptical, Althea did as Tater instructed, and back to the garden she went. Pantyhose in hand, her smile faded. Bubbles was nowhere to be seen. "Uh-oh," she told Tater. "Bubbles is gone." "Oops, I kind of got distracted." She held up a picture book she'd apparently pulled out of one of Althea's bookshelves. They called out her name, but Bubbles didn't surface, at least not on her own. A white truck with a shell trundled into view and stopped, a little man in overalls coming out of the driver's seat. "You missing a basset?" he said, staring crossly at Althea. "Yes." He went round to the back and let out Bubbles. "Now, if you will kindly keep your dog on your property," he said. Althea looked around. I sure will. I don't want to bother any neighbors miles away. I run a tight ship in the county. I'll have to tell you. We have no stray dogs, pigs, or peacocks if I can help it." "Peacocks?" He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I patrol this area out of habit. The Farlands used to keep peacocks here." "Oh, where did they go?" "When the Farlands passed, I finally got the peacocks donated to a bird refuge." "So now you go after renegade basset hounds who can't hardly run?" "I don't appreciate your tone, young lady. I just meant that at least Bubbles is keeping you busy." His scowl didn't let up. "What's your name?" Althea asked, trying to be friendly, though why she bothered, she didn't know. "Fee Busby." Nice to meet you. I'm Althea Thompson. And I'm Tater. I know who you are, Fee snapped. Such a rude man. He gathered his small self, got in his truck, and slowly drove away, like he was trawling for more bassets. Ugh. And he takes care of stray dogs? Althea commented. Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen him smile. Tater looked sad. Althea shuddered. We'll need to be more careful. Your uncle was right about the dog catcher. You were right, too. He has nothing else to do. They sighed and went back to the garden bed, keeping a close eye on Bubbles. Althea was so riled she forgot about the gnats until her head was itching again. Tater put a hose leg over her head without hesitation and made a face. Althea also put one on, and the two giggled uncontrollably, crossing their eyes and beeping each other's noses. But it worked. The bugs weren't biting at her like before. Althea nearly toppled over at the sound of a horn coming from the road. She turned and saw, to her acute embarrassment, that Sheldon was slowly making his way in his truck past her house. "Looking good, ladies," he shouted, then waved as he drove past. Althea and Tater looked at each other and busted out laughing. The warm feeling from Sheldon's greeting stayed with Althea moments later. He and Althea had exchanged open, friendly smiles, as though they'd never had any conflicts, as though they were neighbors who genuinely liked each other. She had tried to put him out of her mind since the dinner at Winnie's. Really, there was no reason to be friends with him. Your uncle probably thinks we're weirdos, Althea said. He wears it too. Everyone in Sunnyridge wears hose, baseball practice and everything. Do you wear them riding horses? No, usually I ride when it cools off. Did I hear you right, that you're getting a new horse? Tater nodded, her eyes sparkling with happiness. Don't you already have a horse to ride? Yes, but Freckles is old, she rolled her eyes. She's almost as old as my dad, and he's old. Althea coughed. He is, huh? How old is that? Oh, 60-something? Althea smiled at her friend's hyperbole. How old are you? Tater was studying Althea's face. How old do you think I am? Tater cocked her head. I'd say 50. Ouch. Not quite that old. I'm 30. The little girl's eyes lit up. Uncle Sheldon's something that old. You and he are perfect for each other. Althea turned her head and suppressed a smile. I guess. That's what Daddy says. Althea adjusted the hose over her nose. What else does he say? That you and Uncle Sheldon like each other a lot? He did. Well, not really. Sorry, Aunt Althea. That was kind of a white lie. Tater gave her a shy smile. He didn't say that. He was telling Uncle Sheldon that you two like each other, but Uncle Sheldon said no, it isn't like that. Althea patted soil around the bases of a rose bush. Your Uncle Sheldon is right. So I asked Daddy what that meant, and Daddy said you and he will marry other people. I probably won't marry Tater. Good, then you and my uncle could be not married together. Althea chuckled, but left it at that. She wasn't sure how much Tater would understand, and she didn't want to keep her young friend's hopes up. But you can still be my aunt, right? If your dad says I can be, then I'm all for it. He doesn't mind. I have all sorts of aunts. With her freckled face up in the air and her confident smile, Tater inspired confidence. Aunt Winnie's one. Great lady. Lucky you. So I was wondering, Aunt Althea, if you could help me bake cookies. Sure, just because? For my club's 4-H fundraiser, I'm supposed to raise $50, and it goes towards prizes, she glowed. I'm old enough to join because I'm in 2nd grade. Look at you. Deal. Thanks. Tater threw her arms around Althea's neck. You're the best. Althea was caught by surprise by the child's enthusiasm. Tears filled her eyes, seeping a little into the ridiculous but effective hose headwear, and she pulled her close. And if you and Uncle Sheldon marry each other, Tater whispered, can I be your flower girl?
Chapter 14. Sheldon. Sheldon knocked on Althea's door, his heart hammering in his chest. Come in, she hollered. He opened the door, his eyes automatically drawn to the domestic scene at the kitchen island. Althea and Tater rolling cookies, their faces and aprons dusted with flour. Bubbles, ever hopeful, sat on the floor, her face tipped up for treats. Althea's bright expression faded. Hi. He braved a smile. "Hi." "Uncle Sheldon!" Tater jumped from the bar stool, ran over, and hugged him at the waist. He glanced at Althea, trying to read her. Her eyebrow was raised, her lips pressed together in a thin line. Tater turned to Althea. "I asked Uncle Sheldon to come. I knew we'd need help." Althea answered with a tentative smile. "I hope it's okay," Sheldon said. "Of course it's okay." Tater tugged at his hand. "But you need to wash your hands and take off your boots." He hesitated for a minute, waiting for some go signal from Althea. "Tater can invite whomever she wants," she said, her expression neutral. "See?" Tater tugged again. Sheldon left his boots at the door and let his niece lead him to the kitchen island. He rolled up his sleeves and washed his hands dutifully. Turning back to the others, he surveyed the island, which was covered with cookies in all sorts of levels of completion. "So, what are you ladies making?" Sheldon asked Tater. "Lots of cherry-filleds," she said in an exaggerated way. "Chocolate chip cookies, sugar cookies, and what's this one, Aunt Althea?" "Snickerdoodles." "Stinker poodles," Tater giggled. Sheldon grinned. "I've had dogs like that on my farm." "Poodles?" Althea scrunched her nose. "For real?" "They make the best hunting dogs. The game never takes them seriously. That's my theory, anyway." Their gazes met and locked. Sheldon could see emotions warring in her eyes, amusement and wariness. Althea looked away first and went back to rolling dough out on a floured wood slab. Tater brushed her hair out of the way with a floured arm, leaving a streak on her face. "I'm so glad you're here, Uncle Sheldon, or we'd be here forever. Eating cookies is a lot easier than making them." "You think?" Tater nodded. "What would you buy at my bake sale?" "One of each kind." "I think you should buy dozens." "You do, huh?" "Yep, and then you should give them to Aunt Althea as a thank you." "That is really nice of her to help you," he agreed. Althea rolled out a batch of sugar cookies. "I told Tater she's doing me a favor. This is a great trial run for when I bake cookies for my B&B guests." Their gazes met again, but this time, Althea's expression was on the defense, challenging. Sheldon decided to tackle the subject head on. "How's the permit going?" "I got it the other day. I'm official, I guess." He shouldn't be happy for her, for what that meant for the town, yet a part of him was. There was something admirable about someone making their dream come true. "Congratulations." She flashed him another wary glance. He didn't deserve her trust, and yet he wanted to earn it. He didn't like being the bad guy, even though he believed it was for a good reason. The smell of paint still lingered in the air, and he studied the changes she'd made to the house since she'd moved in. The lights looked modern and shiny, and gleaming white trim made the pale blue-gray wall paint even prettier. "You've been busy around here." "No kidding." She pushed back her hair with the back of her hand. "I don't want to see wallpaper ever again." "I can't blame you." "What color should I frost the sugar cookies, Uncle Sheldon?" Tater asked. That kept him and Tater busy for a little while. Tater's idea of cookies was to dribble some drops so they were polka dot. They turned out more like tie-dye, but the design was still fun. Althea put a batch of chocolate chip cookies in the oven and set the timer. When the oven dinged, she took them out and set them on racks to cool. Tater and Sheldon hovered over them. "They sure smell good," he said. Tater smacked her lips together. "Mm-hmm." "Want to do a taste test?" Althea asked. "Yes," Tater and Sheldon said in unison before laughing. "Go ahead," Althea said like a tolerant auntie. "Pick a cookie." Tater grabbed one and took a bite. Her eyes widened. "These are the best cookies ever. Eat one, Uncle Sheldon." "I will, don't worry." He picked one, still warm but starting to firm up. Perfection in his book. The cookie was thick and packed with gooey chocolate chips. His mouth did a happy dance as he took a bite, another, and another. "It's good, huh?" Tater asked. "It's amazing." He looked at Althea, who was blushing prettily. For some crazy reason, he imagined this scene at his house. Althea and him baking cookies. He could be happy doing this for the rest of his life. He chastised himself for the wayward thought. He couldn't possibly live up to her standards. She made that clear. He was the enemy to her dreams. And yet, when she took up more pans of cookies to slip in the oven, he followed her with his eyes. He was struck by her beauty, made even more acute by this kindness she had shown to a little girl who obviously hero-worshipped her. Tater had come off her bar stool to look in on the cookies in the oven, with Althea patiently answering her questions. An acute hunger, not just for cookies, came over Sheldon. A craving for a domestic life like this, with him coming home from a day of hay baling to the smells of something cooking. He wasn't locked into some outdated sense of gender roles. He could cook if he needed to, but he knew that she had the cooking skills he didn't possess. In that way, he was more like Pop than Mom. He blinked, shaking himself out of his fantasy. He remembered the pain from being left at the altar by his ex. He'd had the premonition that it was going to happen. She had shown her flightiness every so often. But he had been crazy in love, and Kimmy had blinded him with her beauty. Althea was even more beautiful, and she could have anyone at her feet. Sheldon couldn't possibly fit the bill for her, if she even entertained the thought of dating someone like him, someone who obviously was too backward for her progressive ideas. As Althea turned from the oven, she caught him looking at her. He averted his eyes quickly and pretended to be engrossed in the rest of the cookies on the island.
Chapter 15. Althea. Althea didn't know what to think or how to feel. Having Sheldon Brown in her house, her future B&B, and helping her bake cookies was something she never expected to experience. If it weren't for Tater, she'd have shut her door to him. But the sweet girl meant well, and she had no reason to turn away someone her little friend obviously adored. She caught him looking at her, before he pretended to be engrossed with the cookies. She wondered what he thought of her now. Was she still the enemy to all good things in Sunnyridge? Was she the city woman with the motel dream? Even with his surprising compliment on the work she'd done so far on the remodel, she cast a critical eye once again at the space that was now her home, for good or bad. She noticed little sections where she'd left drips with her paint roller, despite her best efforts. A shadow here and there where she'd put too light of a coat on. In the light of day, she could see all sorts of imperfections. Cookie making was a lot of work, but it was a different kind of exhaustion. This was fun, lighthearted, a pause from the realities of renovating the house for the B&B. The truth was, she was running out of funds to make this dream happen. Her savings had dwindled to maybe 2 months' worth of work plus the mortgage. She may not be able to make it unless she started letting out the rooms. Spring break for some schools would have been perfect, but she didn't feel hopeful she could get everything done by then. The oven dinged, bringing her out of her worries. Sheldon had caught her expression and was looking at her with curiosity. She turned away and worked on getting the cookies out. The last person she would admit her troubles to was this cowboy who didn't want her to succeed in the first place. "Ooh," Tater said, admiring the sugar cookies. "That smells so good." She stared at the cookies. "How'd you learn to cook so good?" "My mom taught me." These are all her recipes. Tater's face fell. "My mom never taught me." Althea looked at Sheldon above Tater's head. To the little girl, she said gently, "I'm sure she would have taught you, if she could have." "Daddy says she didn't like to bake much." "What did she like to do?" "She sewed dresses. She made baby dresses for me." The word baby tugged on Althea's heart. That familiar pang hit her. "Do you like kids, Aunt Althea?" Tater gazed at her. Althea blushed. Of course. I like you, so..." "Then you can marry my dad." And you can be my mom. Sheldon coughed. Althea chose her words carefully. I can still be your aunt. I don't need to marry your dad to be your friend. Oh, Tater cupped her chin, smearing more flour on her cute little face. That's too bad. I like you a lot. She brightened. You can do the next best thing. You can marry my Uncle Sheldon. Sheldon coughed again. Althea felt an imp on her shoulder. I couldn't do that. Tater and Sheldon zoned in on her, interested in what she had to say. She continued, Your uncle has to marry a true blue farm woman, and I'm not that kind. Yes, you are, Tater objected. You bake cookies and paint, and you own a hound. She'd make a great farm wife, don't you think, Uncle Sheldon? A little smile played along his lips. Sure, but can she drive a tractor? Can you? Tater asked Althea. Not at all. That settled it. Tater twisted in her seat to look full on at Sheldon. You can teach her then. Althea and Sheldon both said no. At least on that, they were in agreement. I have so much to do, Althea said. So much, and your uncle can't have someone drive the tractor for him. I might even break it. Sheldon sat there like he was trying not to laugh. Tractors are pretty tough, I dare say. See, Aunt Althea, Tater said, you can't break it. Sheldon kept a straight face. And it's not like having you aerate a round or two would get in the way of my work, but if you're scared of big machines... Althea felt like she had a stone sinking in her gut. The last thing she wanted was to spend more time with this cowboy. But here he was, throwing the gauntlet down. She lifted her chin. Of course not. Are you sure? Sheldon needled. Definitely, Althea nodded. Great. It's settled then. Sheldon stood. Wait, what? I'll give you your tractor lesson. When's a good time? Althea seethed. He wasn't going to let her get out of this, was he? Probably out of sour grapes. Not today, Althea said in a firm voice. Tater and I will be doing this the rest of the day. And selling them at the baseball game, Tater explained. Tomorrow morning, then? Althea stared him down. What exactly would this tractor driving entail? Oh, I would show you how the tractor works and runs. And then I could have you do a couple of turns at the field. Driving the tractor for real? Althea broke out in a cold sweat. Yep, I'm sure you'll do great. He winked, melting her insides irrationally. She refused to find him attractive, a good-looking cowboy, so cliché. More up Noel, the realtor's alley. Fine, she said. Tomorrow, then. Tomorrow. He pulled Tater into a quick hug. See you later, Squirt. That's Miss Squirt to you. Thanks for the cookie. To Althea's astonishment, he grabbed another one off the cooking rack. Why? Was the cowboy turning cocky or what? She didn't like this development. Not one little bit.
Chapter 16. Sheldon. Sheldon went over to the baseball game that evening after he'd done chores, making sure to leave tractor work for Althea's driving lesson that next day. He smiled to himself as he got out of the truck, recalling Althea's panicked expression when Tater innocently got them together. Again. Despite his concerns about a B&B, he sure didn't mind spending a little more time with his new neighbor. Maybe he'd get her rattled enough she'd run screaming from him and Sunnyridge. Or maybe they could fall in love. He shoved the thought away just as he pushed his hat back on his thick head. Hadn't he learned enough from his last heartbreak that women were not to be trusted? But as he walked across the high school parking lot next to the baseball field and onto Tater's baked goods sale, he felt like a burr on a sock, stuck on his neighbor. He could see the two co-conspirators sitting behind a fold-up table, plying their baked goods to the crowd that had come out in droves to catch a baseball game early in the season. Tater was scratching her head as he came up, just as Sheldon scratched his ear. The gnats were out in full force. "Where's your pantyhose headgear?" Sheldon teased. Althea's eyes swiveled to him. "Oops, we forgot them at home." "A shame. I really liked that look the other day." Althea smirked. "Maybe you should model one for us sometime. Tater tells me you rock that look too." "We can all wear pantyhose," Tater suggested. "Let's hope the gnats die off here quickly and say we did," Sheldon suggested. "Good idea." Althea looked relieved. come sit with us, Uncle Sheldon." Tater patted what looked like a bench barely big enough for three. He shouldn't make Althea Thompson's life more difficult, but he couldn't resist this opportunity. "Don't mind if I do." Althea looked like she had some major indigestion. He could have sat on the outside beside Tater. Instead, he slipped between the two ladies. Althea tried to move, but she was hemmed in by boxes on one side. "Sorry," Sheldon said when he accidentally nudged her. "I'm sure you are," Althea said sweetly. Sheldon put a hand to his heart. "Are you accusing me of lying?" "Yep, I wouldn't put it past you." "Why ever would I lie?" "Oh, I don't know. Maybe it has something to do with your aversion to having a motel next to your property." "I might do things to annoy you, but I wouldn't lie." "Whatever." Sheldon smiled to himself. Althea Thompson's control was slipping, and he was getting under her skin, just like she had gotten under his. "Well, hello." Two middle-aged women stopped by the booth. "What are you selling, handsome?" They were batting their lashes at him. Sheldon flashed them his best cowboy smile. "I'm helping my niece sell cookies for her 4-H club." "It's for prizes," Tater piped in. "Oh," one of the women said. "I can't resist cowboys. Cookies for a good cause. I'll get a dozen." "Me too," her friend said. "Why stop at cookies?" Althea said in Sheldon's ear. "Maybe you can sell tractor rides too." The ladies gawked at her. "Tractor rides?" "She's just kidding," Sheldon said. When the ladies left with their cookies, Sheldon swung to her. "Trying to give me a side hustle, are you?" Althea's cheeks turned pink. "Well, you are giving me one tomorrow. I'm sure you could sell a ride to those ladies and help Tater raise more money." "That's a great idea!" Tater cried. "Nope." Sheldon turned back to Althea, his gaze steady. "The tractor ride is something I don't give out to just anyone, and it's not for sale. I have my standards." "What's standards, Uncle Sheldon?" Tater asked. He thought for a minute. "Standards mean I won't do things that I don't believe in." Tater thought for a minute. "Is that why you haven't helped Aunt Althea paint her B&B?" "Well, that's different." He felt a little hot under the collar, self-conscious. "Your Aunt Althea won't let me help her, I'm sure, because she's still sore from our little quarrel." Althea drew herself up. "Do you mind stepping away from the booth for a minute, Sheldon? We'll be right back, Tater." Sheldon watched her huff off and got to his feet reluctantly. "Don't be gone too long," Tater said. "We've got customers." "We won't, I think." Sheldon followed Althea to the side. She stood fuming with her arms akimbo. "I am not sore," Althea said. "I've hardly even thought about the P&Z since." "Oh?" He noted her gritted teeth, flashing eyes, and affronted posture. "Then why were you ignoring me at Winnie's house?" "Because you insulted me in the truck before dinner." "You just want me to compliment you, is that it? Praise your dream?" "It would go a long way as a neighborly gesture, sure, but somehow I doubt you're capable of it." "Really now? You make me sound like an ogre." "I just like to call out hypocrisy when I see it." "Hypocrisy? My, what strong words we are using today, Miss Thompson." She nodded, unleashing a fragrant scent that made Sheldon think of roses. For a moment his mind went blank, distracted by the sensation. "Yes, sir," she said. "You play at being some noble cowboy when you're just like the rest of the male population, threatened by a woman's success." "What?" He frowned. "I am not threatened by your success. Is that what you think this is about?" "Then why did you fight my putting in a B&B?" "I already told you. I don't want a motel or B&B next to my farm." Her lovely eyes welled up. "You just don't get it, do you?" She stomped past him and then returned. "Do me a favor and sit on the other side of Tater." She huffed off once again. "I misspoke," he said half-heartedly. Sheldon stood there for a moment, mulling what happened. He didn't understand why she was still so angry. Her B&B permit was approved, and she got her way, hadn't she? He continued to turn on his charm as best as he could to sell Tater's cookies, but all the while Sheldon sat there aware he was losing ground in their battle. Every time he made a nice overture, she seemed intent on turning it into something nefarious. It was exhausting. By the 6th inning, they'd sold out the cookies. Althea was still not talking to him, or rather, she was talking to him through Tater. "Tell your uncle I changed my mind about riding in his tractor tomorrow." "Tell your aunt if she wants to chicken out, I know where McCoy keeps his coop." "Tell your uncle I'm not scared of a tractor." "Tell your aunt I will believe it when I see it." Tater looked from one to the other. "I think you're telling each other just fine."
Chapter 17. Althea. Althea woke to a roll of thunder. For a moment, she wondered if she would be off the hook with the tractor ride. She did not want to do this. Not after Sheldon showed his true cowboy colors. Why, the man was insufferable, sweet-talking all these women into buying cookies when he could barely be civil with his neighbor. A neighbor who'd helped his niece make cookies. And yes, he did thank her at the end, but it seemed he was talking through gritted teeth, like he was forcing himself to be nice. Granted, she pretty much avoided him the rest of the time at the park, and afterwards she made sure that he and she weren't alone. There was always Tater, thankfully, to diffuse their situation. She slipped out of bed and padded over to the window. There was a dark cloud farther west, but other than that, the sky was blue and clear as could be. With a sinking feeling, she knew she didn't have an excuse to back out now. Why was she so nervous about this? It wasn't like driving a tractor was rocket science, she was sure. Maybe it had something to do with the fact that she'd be alone, in close quarters with her crotchety neighbor. Shoving aside her worries, she put Bubbles outside to do her business and got ready for the day. She looked in her closet, wondering what one wore to drive a tractor. She did have a plaid shirt, but it was a little snug, and she didn't want to end up with a tear in it if she at all were to move around fast. That would be embarrassing. She could wear a t-shirt, but generally speaking, she was allergic to that look. She finally settled on a 3/4 sleeve shirt with pink accents, girlish and sporty. After a few minutes, she let Bubbles back into the house. The basset waddled behind her to her bedroom and plopped herself on the carpet while Althea tried on the t-shirt. No, she looked too cute, young, like she was trying too hard. To do what? Certainly not to attract him. But there was nothing else clean and farm-like for her to wear. It wasn't like he was attracted to her anyway, based on how rude he could be to her. Bubbles gave her a sad look at the door as Althea was about to leave the house. "Okay," Althea said. "You can stay out in your dog run, but no digging, okay?" Bubbles made a pinky promise with those hangdog eyes. She showed an increase in energy as Althea made her way across the kitchen, and then to the back to let the dog out. Just as her phone rang. "Did you change your mind?" Sheldon asked. "Oh, was that today?" she said, refusing to give him the satisfaction that she had been thinking about him, about riding in the tractor, or about being with him in close quarters. "Yep, now's a good time. It looks like it might rain later today. If it does, I won't want to work in the muck." And he hung up without so much as a goodbye. I'm coming," she muttered under her breath as she walked down his lane. On either side, tall trees gracefully arched together, leading the eye to a farmhouse. It was mostly gray, with a dark gunmetal roof and wood pillars that made Althea think of a country store. Behind it, in a field, was an aged green tractor. Sheldon waved from the cab. Althea made her way through the bare field to the tractor. Sheldon opened his door. "Good morning." "Good morning," she said, smiling even though she felt queasy inside. "Watch your step," he said. His advice was welcome. The tractor steps were kind of slick, and she had to get her bearings before she could continue up. He held out a hand to help her in, and she took it. His eyes met hers, as his touch sent a worrisome thrill up her arm. She quickly pulled free from his grasp once she was in the cab. "There's only one seat," she said faintly. "Well, yes, I was going to show you how things work, but the tractor's all yours. It's not like some horse and buggy from the olden times." The tractor was huge. She wasn't sure she could do this, but she didn't want to admit weakness, not to Sheldon Brown. Taking the driver's seat, she waited for instructions. He stood one boot on one step and the other in the cab, so he was leaning close to Althea. A little too close for comfort, but she didn't want him to think his nearness was any big deal, so she didn't move away. "Here's the ignition." He leaned across her lap and tapped the part. "You turn the key just like a car. Here's the throttle. You want to slow down, you pull it to the turtle. You want to speed up, you pull it to the rabbit." He paused to make sure she was following. "Like a riding mower, precisely." "We didn't have that big of a yard for more than a push mower," she said, "but one of my friends did." His nearness was disturbing and distracting. She couldn't move farther away from the warmth of his arm, though pushed flush against the seat as she already was. "Got it?" he asked. He turned to her, bringing his face close to hers. For several seconds, Althea felt even more constricted, unable to breathe. His gaze dropped to her mouth, and she did the same to his. "Yes," she said. "Yes?" he murmured. "I got it." She shook out of the dazed feeling. "Yes, I got the instructions." "Ah, yes." He pulled his arm back. "Would you like me to ride with you for the first little bit?" She panicked. "I'm just driving it around, right?" "Well, I thought you could aerate, too." Her eyes widened. "What do I do?" "It's real easy. You just push this button, and that gets the gears moving." "That's a lot of buttons to keep track of," she said, her hands sweating. "Not really. You'll be fine. If you don't mind sharing the seat, then I can help you before you ride solo." "Okay," she agreed reluctantly. To her shock, he climbed over and slipped behind her completely so that she was sitting between him and the steering wheel, her back square against his chest. His warm breath fanned her cheek. Just as she was about to object, he pushed something and the seat moved back, allowing more breathing room. Just barely. "Better?" he whispered in her ear. No, it was worse, much worse. Her whole body was on fire. It was a wonder that the tractor didn't combust in flames. "Yes," she lied. "Go ahead and start the engine." As she did so, her body felt like it was revving up too. There were sparks firing off and fuel coursing through her veins. He whispered instructions in her ear like they were sweet nothings, and she resisted the urge to close her eyes and simply let the words wash over her. "Now you can adjust the throttle. You can start out slow if you'd like. You can't really go too crazy with the tractor, but if it makes you more comfortable..." He covered her hand with his and helped her maneuver the throttle toward the rabbit. Her heart raced like how she imagined a rabbit's would. His hand on hers engulfed her in a growing blaze. His other hand circled her waist. She was all sorts of upside down and sideways, and all she could do was sit there and try to concentrate. "What if there are animals in the field?" she asked over the din of the engine. Again, his voice was close to her ear. "They learn to get out of the way real quick. I probably should show you how to put the brakes on." "Put the brakes on, yes, that would be good, on whatever this is. And on the tractor, too." He showed her as promised. "Okay," she said, I'm good now." He didn't move for a long second, and then he climbed out of the seat the same way he had slid into it. She scooted to the back of the seat and kept her eyes down, discombobulated. "You can go down to the end of the row," he said, "and then stop, okay?" "Is stopping optional?" He gave her a lopsided smile. "Not really. You might not want to drive the tractor into the fence." "Shucks, that was my plan all along." He raised an eyebrow. "Maybe I should stay in the cab with you." "No." She raised her eyes to his, round with alarm. He held his hands up. "I don't need to sit beside you or nothing. I can just hang back here." "Well, if that's the case, then okay." He nodded, and she turned back to the controls, fiddling with the buttons and gears, setting the behemoth equipment into action, trying to ignore the handsome cowboy beside her.
Chapter 18. Sheldon. Sheldon watched her, his heart in his throat. When he had slid into the seat to show her how to drive the tractor, he had simply aimed to irritate her, to tease. But she'd quickly turned the tables on him. He hadn't counted on the instantaneous combustion as he held her in his arms. That sweet fragrance of hers drove him crazy, as did the way her body fit right against his. He hadn't meant to touch her, but her hand had been in the way of the throttle, so of course he had to demonstrate its use. When she didn't pull back, it had felt too good to give up. Sheldon was fooling himself if he thought that he was immune to her charms. He was falling for Althea, no doubt about it. Unfortunately, as he had feared, it was all one-sided. Why else would she have been so averse to him being in the cab with her? She was doing fine, maneuvering the tractor down the path, the tractor working like it ought to. "You'll want to cut a wide swath here," he coached, "and then make your turn." She followed and kept the tractor going. "Wow," she said in an excited voice. "This is cool." "Isn't it?" He watched her, sitting straight up and excited, his chest tightening with a long-buried emotion. He knew he needed to fight this, but he felt helpless. She had lassoed his heart completely, and he didn't know what to do about it. She made 2 more turns and then turned to him. "I want to stop now, okay?" "Okay." It pained him to look back into her eyes that were seldom this excited. He knew that whatever happened, he couldn't reveal that he'd fallen for her, or risk heartbreak once again. The tractor engine stilled and quiet wrapped around them. Althea turned to him just as he masked his feelings. To her, he would never break out of the cranky neighbor role, which was just as well. He needed a fence between her and his heart. "Thanks," she said with a cute smile that caused his gut to flip. "That was fun." "You're welcome," he said gruffly, and then he opened the door, not offering a hand as she climbed down. If he touched her, he might never want to let go. She gave him a curious glance, as though she was trying to figure him out. A roll of thunder sounded, his head jerking up to locate the direction. "Good luck with the rest of the field," she said. He nodded and got into the cab. Closing the door, he moved on, not looking back at the woman who had stolen his heart.
Chapter 19. Althea. The thrill she'd experienced in the cab of the tractor evaporated like a puddle on a warm summer day. When Althea felt Sheldon's muscular arms around her, he had tempted her into thinking that maybe, just maybe, they could get beyond their neighborly spat. But apparently, she was wrong. One look at his sour, closed-off expression clued her in on his true feelings. Apparently, he still held the B&B against her. She picked her way through the newly cut field, her sneakers getting completely soaked. She made a mental note to buy cowboy boots. Whatever for? It wasn't like she was running a farm. She could hardly expect Sheldon to ask her over to drive the tractor again. That ride. She felt weak at the knees at the memory of practically sitting in Sheldon's lap, his muscles against her back wreaking all sorts of havoc on her body. When he had touched her hand, it was all she could do to not turn toward him and beg for a kiss. A kiss that would never happen now, she was sure. He'd made that clear when she got out of the tractor and he couldn't wait to get rid of her. As though on cue, she felt a drop of rain on her head, and then another. She glanced back at Sheldon, wondering if he was going to continue with his tractor work. Not that she needed to care about him. He was doing fine on his own, just as she was. By the time she walked down Sheldon's driveway, down the lane, and onto her property, the rain was coming down in buckets. Her sneakers were ruined. Maybe she could salvage them by throwing them in the wash. She left them on the porch and went inside, sopping wet. Trailing wet footsteps across the floor, she went to the back to call for Bubbles. Bubbles hated the rain and would be anxious to go inside. But when the basset didn't come in bounding, Althea frowned and poked her head outside farther. Her heart slammed against her chest. In the corner, pooling with water, was a hole, with a corresponding hole outside the chain-link fence.
Chapter 20. Sheldon. Sheldon got out of the tractor and into the house. There was nothing else to do right now than to wait out the rain. It was way past lunch. He scrounged around in the kitchen for a can of soup. That sounded good on a rainy day. That and maybe hanging out indoors with a certain brunette lady. Dream on, Sheldon. He heard urgent pounding on his door. Opening it, he was astonished to find Althea standing there, soaked through. "Come in," he said, his heart beating fast. Seeing her so soon was affecting him greater than he cared to admit to anyone, especially to himself. "I'll get your floor dirty," she said. "Don't worry about that." She came in and pushed back her hair, straggly from the rain. She still looked beautiful, dewy with rain on her face. "Bubbles is gone," she said. "What?" She nodded, her mouth trembling. "She's dug out of her kennel. I looked around my place but couldn't find her." She raised worried eyes to his. "So I came here." He liked the sound of that. She had come to him for help, but now was not the time for self-congratulations. Sheldon put away his soup. "Sorry," she said. "You're in the middle of lunch." "No problem. You want some?" She shook her head and looked around. "Do you not own a dog?" "Not right now. My old golden retriever died a year ago. I haven't had the heart to get another." Her expression softened. "So you know what it's like getting attached to a dog." "Sure do." He turned a warm gaze her way, hoping to reassure her. "She couldn't have gone far." "I hope so. I should have fenced the yard in better. I had thought about putting concrete blocks around the fence, but I didn't." She paced. "I didn't think Bubbles had it in her to try to dig a hole to China." "I doubt she'll get that far, not with those legs." She looked like she needed a hug, but he didn't dare pull her into his arms, though he very much wanted to. "Would you like me to help you look for her?" he asked. "We can jump on my ATV." Her eyes widened with relief. "Yes, please." "I'll get any of my brothers who are available to come help." "Thank you." "But first, you have to get dressed for this weather." He pulled a rain slicker from a hook in his mudroom and put it over her. It drowned her, which just made his heart squeeze even more than ever for this woman. She watched as he folded the sleeves so that they didn't cover her hands. He put his hand up and pushed her longish bangs away from her eyes. She blinked, breaking the spell, and he stepped away. He shrugged on his Carhartt coat. It was a bit heavy for the weather, but at least it would keep him fairly dry. He handed her a smaller helmet that he kept around for smaller guests. It fit her just fine, and he tried to fiddle with the chin latch. "Lift your face," he instructed. His fingers stilled as she slowly looked up, presenting her face to him, trusting and vulnerable. Her lips were just inches from his. "There you go," he said, clicking the latch in place. The vulnerability of this strong woman tugged at his heart. They went outside to a light rain. It was still looking like a swamp in some places. Sheldon had Althea sit behind him on the ATV. "Hold on." 3 of his brothers met up with them and they scattered different directions. Sheldon made a few passes down the road, back and forth without success. Next, he took them down to her backyard, where a path through the weeds led to a sprawling field. No one had been back there in a while, so they had to knock down winter overgrowth before they could proceed. Behind him, Althea called out Bubbles' name. Sheldon tried to keep in a circle that he widened in stages until he was near the fence bordering their properties. Again, here Althea shouted her dog's name, her voice sounding hoarse and frantic. They kept going until the rain let up and a rainbow shone above in the sky. "Do you see that?" Sheldon asked. "Yes," she said. "It's a sign. We'll find her. You'll see." Her arms tightened and he felt her press her face against his back. He closed his eyes and enjoyed the hug, and then went back to driving some more. By 8:30, and with the sky darkening, she spoke in his ear. "We can stop now." Sheldon nodded. "We can take up a search again tomorrow," he reassured her. His brothers wished her luck in finding Bubbles as they got in their trucks and drove off. "You should call the pound," Sheldon suggested. "That's a good idea," Althea agreed. Do you have a number for them? It's just the sheriff's office. Dispatch will send the animal control officer. She made a face. The last thing I need is to face that ornery Fee Busby. So you've met him, huh? Sheldon smiled. Althea nodded. But I guess I gotta do it. He drove the ATV to her place and she dismounted. Oh dear, she said, putting a hand to her forehead. You've missed dinner. You have too, silly. Her concerned expression deepened. Let me call the pound and then let's feed you. Normally he would have argued, but he knew feeding him would make her feel better. Okay. He followed her into her house. Flipping the light switch on, she gasped.
Chapter 21. Althea. Puddles of water formed on the hardwood floor. The ceiling over the kitchen had been leaking this whole time. Inspection should have caught this, Sheldon said. Althea's glance took in the mess, her mind racing at what this meant for the house, for her dream. He did mention how it needed some work, but he didn't say it would be this bad. The reality was, she had no money for the roof. She should have begged her sister for a loan, something, anything to take care of the roof right away. And now, Bubbles was lost. Althea burst into tears. She cried noisily into her hands, uncaring of Sheldon watching her. She felt strong arms circle her and froze before leaning into the warmth of his embrace. Shh, he said, stroking her hair. He was warm and everything she needed right at that moment. Her body started to calm down and hope filled her. I need to call dispatch, she said, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Yes, you do that. His eyes were kind. She looked up the number and dialed it. The nice dispatcher said she would have the animal control officer call her. Her gut twisted at the prospect, but she simply thanked the dispatcher. She whirled around to see bowls of all sizes sitting on the floor. Sheldon was nowhere to be seen. After a few minutes, he came walking down the stairs. I checked the rooms. I think I got all the big puddles. Ugh. Althea covered her face with her hands. Her eyes were swollen from crying. What a mess. Can I give up my dream now? His expression was unreadable. Do you want to? Very much. Then give up. What? She cried. Of course, you'd let me quit. He gazed at her, looking confused. Sorry, should I not? No, absolutely not. She took a deep breath and let it out noisily. I just wanted some sympathy. Tough love. He smiled. I bet you'll feel better with food in your belly. Maybe, she conceded. She scrounged around for 2 cans of clam chowder and fired up the gas oven. Within minutes, she had large, fat biscuits baking in the oven. She turned to Sheldon, who was looking at pictures of her family she'd put on the fireplace mantel. He was scruffy from all their running around. His hair was sticking up in places where he'd shucked off his hat, and his damp shirt molded to his muscular torso. Her throat tightened with wayward longing, and she glanced away. Reaching into cupboards, she pulled out bowls and saucers, as well as a couple of mugs. Want some hot chocolate? She asked. He turned those dark brown eyes to her. They had lit up with pleasure. Sure. She wrenched her gaze once again to the task at hand. What was happening to her? Why was she letting him into her heart? Why was she deviating from the plan? The oven dinged, giving her a reprieve from her thoughts that whirled round and round her head like a tractor on autopilot. She took out the biscuits, which had risen prettily. Wow, those look great, Sheldon commented. Althea looked at them with pride. Aren't they? They're my specialty. How'd you get them so huge? Buttermilk and double the recipe, plus I don't need them too much. Well, I need them. She put the biscuits on a clean dish towel in a serving basket, then went to work on the hot chocolate. How about if I get the drinks? He had come up to Althea quietly, and she started, when she realized he was standing right behind her. It's in that cupboard right there. She would have stepped aside, but his body kind of hemmed hers in. She would have had to push her way past him, but she just stood there, paralyzed, watching his arms reach around her and up above her head into the cupboard. He took out 2 mugs and the container of hot chocolate, setting them on the counter in front of her. He hadn't touched her, and yet she felt as though her body was attuned to his, alive. How many teaspoons do you put in your mug? He asked in her ear, sending shivers up and down her spine. 3 heaping ones, she managed to say. 3 it is, came his low voice. And then he stepped away. Relief and disappointment washed over her. She braced herself against the counter, letting her heart get back to normal. Once she felt more like herself, she tackled the rest of dinner. Sorry, this isn't the ribs that I owe you from that one time, she said, remembering. No worries. I love biscuits. She was pleased with his words and smiled at him. He smiled slowly back. Inside, she felt warm like a freshly baked biscuit. All she needed was butter. They ate the simple meal in silence. Althea was famished, but in the back of her mind, she kept thinking of poor Bubbles. She set down her unfinished biscuit and fought back tears. I'm sure she's okay, Sheldon said. She raised grateful eyes to his. His words and sympathetic expression made her feel braver. Where could she have gone? She asked, trying to not cry. I'm really surprised we couldn't find her. It seems that we should be able to, since she's not a fast walker. Maybe for once she ran fast because she was scared, chased by something. Or maybe she smelled someone's leftover ribs and she stole them from their porch. Althea tried to smile at Sheldon's attempt at humor. Then she studied the phone, willing it to ring. Do you want to go out again tonight? He asked. She gaped at Sheldon. Tonight? Well, sure. That way she wouldn't have gotten very far. But it's so late, he shrugged. Not like I have to clock in somewhere tomorrow. I'm my own boss. I wish we could have heard from the dog catcher. As though on cue, the phone rang. Althea answered it at the first ring. Hello? Fee Busby's raspy voice came on the line. I have a message to call? Yes, Althea said. What can I do for you? I was calling to see if you by chance impounded my basset hound. Wait, are you the lady on Riverdale Lane? In the old Farland house? Would admitting it be bad or good? She opted for honesty. Yes, I'd warn you about letting your dog out. I know, she dug her way out of her kennel. He harumphed. I don't have your basset in custody. Althea closed her eyes. Okay, thank you. If you see her, could you please call me right away? I'm heading out again to look for her. So if you get our voicemail, go ahead and leave a message, please. I'll try, he said, infuriatingly non-committal. Althea hung up, defeated for the moment. Sheldon stood. Ready? She nodded, bolstered by his encouraging smile. Even though it was no longer raining, the night air felt like rain. Humid and smelling of fresh dirt. This time, she had put on a raincoat that fit her better. She tried to ply the rain slicker onto Sheldon, but he refused it, assuring her that his coat was just fine. They went out to her parking lot and loaded up once again onto his ATV. Her heart was sick thinking that they'd still had a night ahead of them, where Bubbles could be out and in danger. Who knew where? It's a good thing it stopped raining, Sheldon shouted over his shoulder. Bubbles will hopefully have an easier time finding her way back to your house. Althea wanted to believe his words. She started calling out again, getting a sore throat as she strained against the workout her voice box wasn't used to. Sheldon joined in too, his voice loud and booming. Slowly, inevitably, she'd started liking him a lot more. Maybe even more than like, though her mind rebelled at such a thought. They were out for what seemed like a good hour. Even though she was riding behind the ATV, not having to walk, the constant jarring was hard on her body. She wanted to stop, and at the same time, she didn't want to. She could have kept holding on to Sheldon for as long as he was willing to drive the ATV. As the thought came to her mind, he stopped the ATV and turned. I think we should head back. She fell against him, weepy, and he turned, sheltering her in his arms. She felt his lips brushing her forehead, and then her hair, the gesture feeling absolutely right and welcome. After a minute or two of a good cry, she raised her hand to brush away her tears. He cupped her head in his hands and wiped the tears with his thumbs. Her heart pounded at the way he held her face and the way he held her heart. The thoughts of the B&B, their earlier disagreements, his teasing and jabs all fell away, leaving a warmth within her. He lifted her face so that it angled more toward his, hovering above. He's going to kiss me. Her eyes drifted closed. As she waited for what seemed like eternity, she heard a sound, a low howl that ended in a plaintive note. "Do you hear that?" she said, her eyes flying open. He blinked and cocked his head. "What?" "Shh! There it is again." This time, his eyes lit up. "Yes, I do hear that." He twisted in the seat and listened around. "That way," he pointed north. "Bubbles!" Althea shouted as soon as they slowed down, and there they could hear a howling again, like it was coming from the ground below them. Sheldon shone a flashlight he'd brought with him and saw that they were by a little fenced area for a power substation. Down deep in a hole in the ground outside the substation were two sad eyes, a lolling tongue, and huge ears. "Bubbles!" Althea knelt in the mud, peering into the hole. "Don't you worry, hun. Mommy's going to get you." "It looks like she's fallen in." Sheldon trained the flashlight on Bubbles. "I'll try to reach for her. Come, Bubbles, come." Sheldon coaxed the basset, but he just couldn't reach far enough down. "Maybe she can climb up if the angle's right," Althea suggested. Sheldon shone the light around. "I don't think so. It's pretty steep. She could have slid down." He looked around. "I'll go and find a stick or something." "I'll stay with her." He nodded and started his search, leaving her his flashlight. "Bubbles, honey, you've got to climb out," she said. "Dig back out to Mommy." Althea could hear some scraping, whining, and then silence. She swallowed back tears. At least they'd found Bubbles. But how much longer would she be in the hole before they could get her out? What if the hole were to collapse in the rain? Sheldon returned empty-handed. "All I could scrounge around were twigs. We might need to go back to the house so I can make a noose and lower it to her. She might strangle in it. I'll also bring a pole or something. You could lower me to get in the hole." He stared at her. "What if there's a den of snakes in there?" She rolled her eyes. "Then she'd be dead by now." But part of her broke into a sweat despite the cool, wet air. "So," Sheldon said, "you want me to truss you by your ankles and lower you to Bubbles?" "Yes," she bit her lip. "We can certainly try it." He put his fists at his hips. "In the dark." "Well, we can't wait until daytime. What if the snakes do go in there?" He frowned. I don't like this idea. You don't know what's down there." "I'm not scared of spiders." Sheldon studied her for a long moment and nodded. "Fine." She started to position herself so he could lower her, but he touched her arm. "Wait." Turning back to him, he caught the side of her face with his hand. He planted a soft kiss on her forehead. "What was that for?" she whispered. "For luck." He planted another kiss on her cheek. Althea blushed at his sweet gestures. She kind of wished he would kiss her on the lips, but there wasn't time for that. Bubbles needed their help. "You won't let my legs go," she confirmed as she contemplated the dark hole. "I'll try not to." He sounded more serious than teasing, and she wasn't sure how she felt about that. Once he held her by the ankles and lowered her into the hole, she knew instantly that this was a horrible idea. It was one thing to poke her hand or arm into the hole. It was an altogether different thing for her to go head first, nearly straight up, so she could get into the ground. As darkness closed upon her head, with only the occasional beams of light from above making it past her, she reached out, hoping to feel Bubbles' fur soon. "Bubbles," she said, her voice echoing in the space. "Come, sweetie." She could hear Bubbles whine and move around. "Good girl." Her blood was rushing to her head, and the confined space was making her claustrophobic. She wanted to get out right then, to beg Sheldon to get her, but she endured the scary sensation. She needed to stay strong for Bubbles. Her fingers finally made contact with Bubbles, who was shaking, most likely from wagging her tail. "Yes, that's it, sweetie. Come to Mommy." But there was something wrong, terribly wrong. Around her, rivulets of water started coming down and above. Sheldon was saying, "I'm pulling you out, Althea."
Chapter 22. Sheldon. But Althea wouldn't budge. Sheldon's surprise at the rain turned into fear as his grip on Althea's ankles turned slippery. "I'm pulling you out, Althea," he had said. Not that he was asking for her permission. Except as he pulled, she wouldn't budge. "Althea," he called out. Althea! No answer. Any minute now she could slip past his fingers. He should have put a rope around her waist. He should have. The rain continued to pour. He gripped her legs and pulled as hard as he could. There was some movement, but now he was afraid he might hurt her. But there was no way he was going to let her go. He tried another angle, pulling. Again, there seemed to be some movement, though he wasn't sure if it was just his hand slipping off her ankles. No! He thought of his joke to her that her move to Sunnyridge had not been an answer to Sheldon's prayers. Now he knew that it was. And if you let her in my life, God, I'll hold on to her for as long as she'll let me. As if the heavens parted, a pause and the rain came. Still, several excruciating moments passed before he felt some progress in his task. Althea was coming out now. Not without struggle, but he could tell a difference. He pulled, and soon she was emerging, slick with mud and water, but she was coming out, with Bubbles in her grasp. Althea bent at her waist in the fetal position, spitting out mud. Bubbles was also a mess. But they were both alive. Sheldon hugged them close.
Chapter 23. Althea. Althea could have stayed in the shower the whole night. After she washed and dried Bubbles, she had sent the dog out to the living room where Sheldon was waiting. She felt funny coming out when she looked hideously muddy, but she knew there would be a fix for that. Several minutes later, trying to resist dawdling too long in the hot shower, she came out into the steamy bathroom, tired but happy. Even with her house's roof falling apart, her dog was alive and safe, and a certain cowboy had revealed his good heart. She would worry about the roof later. Changing into her jammies, she towel-dried her hair and came out to the family room, padding softly barefoot. Hound and Cowboy were both asleep on a blanket on the floor. They were so cute, even cuter than she didn't know what, really. Nothing could top this. Well, maybe when Bubbles was a puppy. Althea had given Sheldon a towel and blanket earlier so he could dry off. The poor guy looked positively beat and scraggly lying there. Near his chest, Bubbles was curled up, also exhausted. Her heart expanded at least 10 times, trying to wrap itself around the man and the dog. She didn't know what the future held, but it was something she knew she would have to deal with when the right time came along. She lay down beside Bubbles and snuggled close. In his sleep, Sheldon stirred. His hand stroked Althea's head, soothing her until she felt drowsy herself. Just a few minutes, she told herself. She would nap for just a minute. The next time she woke up, her back was flush against Sheldon's chest, and he was spooning her. Bubbles lay in her arms, soundly asleep. If this was a dream, she didn't want to wake up. Althea wanted to lie there forever and be held by this cowboy, her cowboy. So she smiled and closed her eyes again. The front door opened. "Hi, Aunt Althea!" Althea's eyes flew open, and there, staring at them from the porch, were Tater, Dylan, Patrick, McCoy, Winnie, and the dog catcher. One huge party all crashing into the reality of her being caught spooning Sheldon Brown. Tater's eyes were huge. "Did you have a sleepover?" No." Althea sat up and turned to Sheldon. He was rubbing his eyes. "We fell asleep and—" Her words trailed off into her blush. Patrick smirked. "Now you're going to have to marry." "Really?" Tater squealed. "You can run off to Vegas," Dylan said. No, have the wedding here," McCoy said. "We want to come." "They're just teasing," Althea told Tater, her cheeks burning. As Tater's face fell, Althea shot the supposed grown-ups a dirty look. Sheldon's brothers shook their heads. "Well," Fee Busby said, "I'm glad I don't have a repeat offender out loose." Bubbles rolled to her tummy and raised her eyes to the dog catcher. Althea couldn't even characterize the Bassett's gaze anywhere close to a glare. "She's not a repeat offender," Althea said. "She simply got lost in the countryside." Fee crossed his arms and sniffed. "You could have at least called me to let me know you found her. I've been, out and about." She was surprised he'd taken the time to do that. "Sorry," she said, this time with sincerity. It was late." She yawned. Fee rolled his eyes and huffed off to presumably catch other unsuspecting animals in town. Tater walked in and looked at the bowls. "What's with all the water? Was Bubbles thirsty?" Althea's spirits drooped at the reminder. "My roof's leaking." Tater brightened. "Does that mean you'll move in with Uncle Sheldon now?" "If she wants to," Sheldon said. Althea jabbed him in the side. "It means I have to get a loan to get it fixed." "You mean like money? Why don't you have a fundraiser?" Tater suggested. "Like I did." Althea bit her lip. "I don't think this small town will help me out. No one knows me." "We do," Patrick said. "That's really sweet of you, but—" "The canned cherry cobbler cook-off is coming up," McCoy said. "You can have a booth there." "The what?" Althea chuckled. Winnie smirked. "It started out kind of like a joke 20 years ago during my grandma's time. A woman, Hetty Fields, won a bake-off with her cherry pie, but it was from canned fruit, which was a big no-no. The mayor made a big to-do about it, even so far as to threaten her arrest. So Hetty put on a cook-off the following spring to celebrate canned cherries." "That's all people make?" Althea asked. "Canned cherry cobbler?" "Anything goes, really." Winnie's green eyes danced. "Just an excuse for everyone to get out of the house." McCoy walked up to Bubbles. "I'm glad your owner found you, Bubbles. Were you scared?" Bubbles agreed, with her sad eyes. Tater hugged the basset. "You don't have a thing to worry about. We'll keep Fee Busby from you, and we'll get your roof fixed." "It's going to take a lot of money to fix the roof," Althea pointed out. "I don't know if a fundraiser would be enough to help it, especially since everyone knows the P&Z chair is against the B&B. She didn't dare look at Sheldon. "Pshaw," McCoy said. "Anyone with two eyes knows he's fallen for you, Althea. How could he say no to this and still have a chance with you?" "I'm not against your B&B, Sheldon said. Althea turned to him. "But you were against it from day one." His eyes danced. "I said I'd be opposed to a motel." His voice lowered. "And this ain't one." Althea blinked back grateful tears. "What changed your minds about it?" "Oh, I'm still making up my mind about it." "Don't take too long," Patrick said, "or this one might get away from you." "Spoken like a true expert," Winnie muttered. Sheldon smiled wryly. "That's what I reckon. Patrick's advice, that is." Althea blushed again. These brothers sure weren't subtle about their campaign. Did Sheldon really like her that much? The thought made her kind of excited at first, and then sad. It'll be hard to tell him no, eventually. And then she got looking at the bowls. "Some B&B this is," she winced. "Bowls and bowls." "Don't forget bassets," Tater hugged Bubbles. "Bassets and bubbles," McCoy said. "How about breakfast and back to school?" Dylan motioned for his daughter. "Come, Tater, or you'll be late." Althea and Sheldon stood, allowing her to fold up the thick blanket that had been their bed. After a few minutes, Patrick, Winnie, and McCoy left too. "Finally," Sheldon said. "I didn't think those guys would leave." "That's kind of rude to say." "Well, they were in the way of me telling you something." Her heart pounded as she filled with panic. Was he going to declare himself? She'd better nip this in the bud before he did so. "Althea." "Sheldon." She held up a hand. His head whipped up. "Whatever you're going to say," she said, "don't." He gazed at her for several seconds. "You don't even know what I was going to say." "Oh, I know." She walked around to the island and barricaded herself behind it. "You're going to say that you think you're falling in love with me and you want a future together." "Well," he paused. "No." "Oh." Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. "But I'm never wrong about affairs of the heart." Nice save, pathetic, actually. He studied her. "Never, huh?" "Never." She nodded for emphasis. "I'm good at sizing up people. I could always read my clients when they came in to do their taxes." He raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "They start telling me their finances, and I'm always right. The ones who make the most money are more modestly dressed." Sheldon blinked. "Anyway, this isn't about taxes." "No, but it's similar." He put his fists on his hips. "And how is love similar to taxes?" "To earn it, you'll have to give more back." "Wow, I'd never thought about taxes that way before." She smiled, smug in her knowledge. Then she remembered. "But you're telling me I'm not right." He looked almost sad. You're not right. You're not falling in love with me? Her pride hurt, and maybe her heart a little. No, I'm not falling in love with you, he paused. I've fallen in love with you. Althea put a hand to her chest, digesting his declaration. Well, that's kind of a problem. Why? He murmured. This isn't about the B&B, is it? Not now. Not now, he frowned. She shook her head, grateful for the safety of the island barricade. At first, I kind of hated your guts, but of course, if you're telling me now that you aren't opposed to the B&B, I'm definitely warming to the idea, so long as you stick to it being small. Anyway, there's something I need to tell you, but I'll be honest, I'm very afraid. He swallowed, also looking scared. I am too, a bit, I must admit. What's the worst thing I could tell you? She asked, blinking up at him. He made an exasperated sound. Althea, really? Can't you just tell me instead of making this a game of 20 questions? Althea gritted her teeth. Well, maybe I just won't tell you. His shoulders fell. I can guess. She felt sorry for him, but his willingness didn't lessen her fear. Never mind. Wait, what? Sheldon frowned. Don't worry about it. You've fallen in love with me. She looked away, then back. I'm flattered, but I can't accept your love. He looked at her for a long time, and then dropped his gaze. I see. She couldn't tell him why. Not now. Did it matter anyway? Maybe it would be easier for him to think she wasn't in love with him. He nodded and walked backwards, away from the island, away from her, out of her life. Don't worry, I'll still help you at your fundraiser. But he sounded like he'd just as soon sing George Strait badly at karaoke. I wasn't worried about that, she said, mainly because she wasn't thinking of it. He turned and walked out the door, leaving her in a quiet house, empty except for a basset hound. She walked over and hugged Bubbles. At least we have each other, she whispered. Her heart broke in two, as she deserved, but less than if she'd allowed things to progress much further. She had driven Sheldon off, and now he was leaving. She won this round, forever. Shouldn't she be happy? When she heard him rev up the ATV, she almost had a change of heart, wanting to chase him down, to tell him that she couldn't have kids, his kids. There, that's my ugly secret. But she stayed silent and buried her face in Bubbles' soft fur, safe, as she always played it all her life.
Chapter 24. Sheldon. Sheldon came to Sunday dinner at Pop's as usual. His brothers were already there, Winnie and Tater too. He was quiet and came to the buffet to dish up. Hoping no one would notice, he'd just as soon not be there. "Why the long face, Cowboy?" Winnie asked, cocking her booted leg and studying him. He wished Winnie wasn't so smart. He could never hide anything from her green eyes. He simply swallowed and minded his own business, dishing up his baked potato. "I suspect it has something to do with a certain lady," Patrick said. Winnie sized up Sheldon. "Can't say I'm surprised." "Ouch!" Dylan clutched at his heart. "Winnie, if you can't say anything nice." "I'd seen those two sparring at my back porch," she retorted. "I know what kind of a knucklehead Sheldon could be. Just the same, I'm sorry." "No, you're not," Chandler said. "Sure I am," Winnie protested hotly. "You're just sore that there'd been talk of Sheldon marrying before you and Patrick did." Winnie rounded up on Chandler. "For reals, Chandler? You think I'm that petty?" "Just teasing." Patrick was silent, as he ought to be if he knew what was good for him. Pop held out his hands like a referee. "Anyone want to tell me what nonsense you guys are yammering about?" "I'll tell," Sheldon said. Everyone looked at him. He regretted saying that. Now he had to tell the truth. "I told Althea that I was in love with her, and she said she couldn't accept my love." McCoy scratched his head. "Now why would she say that? You and her seemed to get on, and the way you were spooning each other on the floor." "What?" Pop bellowed. "Are you making your mother turn over in her grave with a scandal, Sheldon Brown?" "No, sir," Sheldon glared at his youngest brother. "We'd stayed out looking for her hound dog and ended up falling asleep on her living room floor. Nothing dishonorable." Pop kept his skeptical eye on him. "Did you find the dog?" "Yes, that was the good part." Sheldon sighed. "Anyway, I declared my love and she broke my heart." "Like Kimmy did," McCoy said. Chandler reached over and thwacked McCoy on the head. "What?" McCoy said. "It's true." "Well, yes," Chandler said, "but you don't have to go reminding him of that." Sheldon shrugged. "Better that I find that out now than later when we're lining up at the chapel." Heath nodded. "Save us all the trouble of dressing up for sure." Tater tugged at her daddy's sleeve. "But I thought you said they're getting married." "Hush, Tater," Dylan said. "This is grown-up talk." Tater's face crumpled. "Does this mean we won't help Aunt Althea with her fundraiser?" "I told her we'd still do that," Sheldon said, though now he was regretting it. How could he possibly be around Althea when she didn't even return his love? He'd do it like he did most of the hard things in his life, he supposed, get back to work and forget the girl somehow. But little things at Sunday dinner kept poking at him like a prickly weed, reminding him of a certain someone. Cookies on the buffet, Tater talking about how she'd made her 4-H fundraising goal thanks to a lady's help, the way Patrick and Winnie hungrily looked at each other when they didn't think anyone was looking. Even if Patrick wasn't all perfect with his lady, at least they loved each other. Those little moments made him want what he couldn't have, reminded him of how he wasn't enough for a woman to love. He went out to the front porch just as everyone swarmed around the desserts that everyone had brought. "Sheldon?" Sheldon turned to look at Patrick. He grunted and turned back to the quiet scene. It was dark out, and the moon was a sliver. A beautiful night. Too bad he was feeling kind of ugly. Patrick stood abreast of him, looking out the same way. "Women are complicated." "You can say that again." Sheldon's heart twinged with hurt. "Thing is, I don't know that Althea was that type of a woman." "Huh?" "She doesn't seem to bait and switch. I've seen you two around each other. I think she likes you. A lot." "Well, you're wrong." "The mystery is, why is she pushing you away?" "That's a mystery, all right." "No, I mean, if she likes you, why would she turn you down?" "I don't know." Sheldon leaned his weary head on his arm against the porch pillar. "You just said so yourself. Women are complicated." "It's like with my Winnie," Patrick said with a touch of frustration in his voice. "I haven't been able to figure her out. I don't know if I should even try. When I tell her I want to go rodeo, she's kind of quiet, so I ask if she doesn't want me to go. She says, 'Go, I want you to go,' but all angry-like. So I take what she says at face value, and then she won't speak to me for days. Today's the first day she's actually talked to me. Probably just to save face in front of y'all. You know what I mean?" "So you're saying maybe Althea says one thing but means something else?" Sheldon scratched his nape. "That's it." "How do I figure out what she's really saying?" "I'm not the one to ask." Patrick hung his head and chuckled. "Still figuring out woman talk myself." "I appreciate the advice, though it doesn't help all that much." Patrick gave him a side glance. "Sorry. But thank you." Patrick put a hand on his shoulder. "Good luck. If you decide to fight for her, I think she's a gal worth fighting for. At least Winnie says so, and Winnie is usually never wrong." "Except for picking you." Patrick laughed. "Except for that." Left behind to ponder the secrets of the universe, Sheldon thought about what his brother told him, and what he could do about a certain brunette. By the time he gave the situation some more brain power, his head felt like he was going to explode in his cowboy hat.
Chapter 25. Althea. It was warming up, but Althea sensed a chill in the air. Chandler came over to do some work, but he was uncharacteristically quiet. Tater came over too, so that they could plot what cookies to bake for the fundraiser, but Althea could tell she was tiptoeing around. And Sheldon, of course, she didn't expect to come around, and he didn't. The one thing that lifted her spirits nowadays was the sight of her rose bushes leafing out, and Bubbles' company. Those were the only bright spots in otherwise long, empty days. She was upstairs doing finishing touches on spots that needed paint corrections when the doorbell rang. Bubbles howled for a minute. Althea kept her brush in her water cup and went to the door. "Thanks, fierce girl," she told Bubbles. On the front porch were Mr. and Mrs. Pitt, the couple from her first and only P&Z. She gaped at them in surprise and then remembered her manners. Please, won't you have a seat?" Althea gestured to the wicker patio furniture. "Won't stay long," Mr. Pitt said. "The ticker's still not 100%, but the missus and I will sit down." He looked around. "You sure have done this place a world of good." "Thanks. How are you feeling?" "I'm alive, praise the Lord." "Truly," Althea nodded. "No small thanks to you," Mrs. Pitt added. Althea smiled but felt uncomfortable at all the praise. "I happened to be in the right place at the right time." "I truly believe that," Mr. Pitt said. His wife nodded in agreement. "So, you're probably wondering why we're here." Althea looked at them expectantly. "I figured you'd tell me eventually." The Pitts looked at each other. "Tell him, Peter," Mrs. Pitt said. "I got talking about you with that red-headed girlfriend of Patrick Brown's that likes to wear them flashy boots." "Winnie?" "Yes. Long story short, she said you were doing a fundraiser for your roof." He glanced at the old house. "I played here when I was a little boy. Did you know that it was one floor to begin with and they added on over the years?" "I had no idea. They did a good job. The addition was seamless." "Well, yes. Old man Farland was a bit of a dingbat, but he was a good hard worker. So, anyway, I've decided I want to give you some money to help you with your remodeling, for your roof or anything else you need." Her breath was knocked from her lungs in a whoosh. "Wow, that's awfully kind of you." She glanced at Mrs. Pitt for confirmation, and the old lady's eyes were shining happily. They were so generous, and she choked up with grateful tears. "Thank you so much. I am grateful for your kindness. Now, I don't believe in handouts. Do you, young lady?" "I sure don't." Althea braced herself for his expectations. But she would be open to anything at this point. "I grew up with nothing. Nothing." Mr. Pitt's mouth quivered. "Had to scrape by. I don't have to nowadays." "Yes," Mrs. Pitt said, stroking her husband's arm. "He's certainly loaded, and will be, with the land being sold and all." Althea blinked politely. Mr. Pitt continued, "I want to give you half of what you need for the roofing. By my estimates, it's in the thousands. Is that right?" "Yes," her heart thudded. "Half would be so generous. Thank you, Mr. Pitt." "Don't get too excited yet. There's a condition." Althea waited once again. "You must raise the other half." "Well," Althea countered, "I'm already planning to hold a bake sale at the canned cherry cobbler cook-off." Mrs. Pitt blinked furiously. "Oh, honey, that won't raise that much money unless you make magic cupcakes that make people want to buy nothing else." Althea bit her lip. She may be right. With this added challenge, it changed things up. "I'll simply have to do my best, I guess." Mr. Pitt stood. He was done here. "Well, I wish you luck. When you have half the money, come for the other half." Althea watched them leave, her mind in a whirl. She hadn't even thought through how hard it would be to raise funds at the festival. Now there was this opportunity, and could she even take advantage of it? She needed help, fast. For one brief moment she thought of Sheldon, but it wouldn't be fair for her to go to him. She turned him down, and she needed to leave him in peace. But she could turn to Winnie. Yes, she remembered how Winnie was all friendly and a go-getter. They could work together on something clever and bombastic, something irresistible and not lame. "A cowboy kissing booth?" Althea said, echoing Winnie's words. They were sitting in Winnie's kitchen brainstorming. Winnie had sweetly agreed to help Althea. Not only was she willing, she appeared extremely excited about the prospect. But this suggestion, yes, wouldn't that be grand? Winnie asked. I happen to know a bunch of cowboys, and this would be a hit. How exactly does a cowboy kissing booth work? Her tawny green eyes gleamed. Well, people pay to get kissed by a cowboy. Simple. And which cowboys would you be asking to help? I don't know. There's so many in this town, I wouldn't know where to start. Althea peeked suspiciously at her friend, who was smiling like she was innocent. There's a few families around that my grandma grew up with, Winnie mused. I could ask them to volunteer their cowboy sons. That sounds like a lot of cowboys. Oh, of course. Winnie's eyes shone with mischief. That's the beauty of it. Only one person can kiss the cowboy of their choice. That way, the demand would be greater than supply. And if you know economics, that means the demand will drive the price up. Winnie winked. Bingo! Okay, sounds like it might work, Althea conceded, though she still was skeptical. It should. This town is so starved for entertainment, they'll pay to watch the kisses. Wait, so people aren't just paying to kiss the cowboy, but to watch? Well, yes, there will be a tip jar, and if they like the kiss, they can tip generously. Althea blinked. Why would cowboys agree to do this? For me? Why not? Winnie stared at her. You're the woman who saved Mr. Pitt from dying. Oh, that, well, Althea waved away her embarrassment. One would think that would have died down a while back. Plus, that used to be a landmark house. Everyone knew the Farlands until they got sick and the place got run down. I think many in this town want to see you succeed, bring back the glory days to this farmhouse. I hope so. That's a good angle, Althea nodded. I like that. That stays true to what I'm trying to do. Perfect. Also, I can challenge each family. No one will want to be left out. Cowboys against cowboys. We'll see how much someone can raise. Sounds fun, Althea conceded. Winnie? Yes. Will you be asking the Brown brothers? I don't know. Winnie gave her a sly smile. Should I? I figured you might since you know them, but it's up to you, of course. Winnie grinned. Of course, I'll start there. I'm just playing with you. Only the ones not spoken for. I mean, I guess I could pay to kiss Patrick. She fell deep in thought. Or have other women have a chance at him. Frankly, he drives me crazy nowadays. You should do it. Don't let other gals get their claws on him. Winnie shrugged. There'll be plenty of women who will want to pay, I'm sure. The rodeo groupie types, Winnie rolled her eyes. That could be good or bad. I'll leave that up to you and him. What about the other brothers? Winnie was deep in thought. Chandler should be game. He's totally sold on your renovation project. Yes, he is. McCoy would say yes. He's such a sweetheart. Right. Dylan, now him, I'm not sure. I think he'd be worried for Tater. He wouldn't want his daughter to think that there's going to be a new mama for her. You know how Tater gets attached so fast. Yes, I know. Althea chewed on her lip. But I'll ask anyway. Wouldn't hurt. Heath, well, he'll do it fighting tooth and nail, but end up loving it. And, of course, there's Sheldon. Sheldon. Althea kept her eyes down, trying to not let on that the mere mention of his name filled her with longing. Now, Sheldon would be a good one, Winnie said, since he's not attached to anyone. Althea could only nod, glum as could be. The reason he was not attached was staring at her in the mirror. I mean, you and him aren't... Winnie shot a glance at Althea. Oh, no, Althea said quickly, not at all. Well, good then, so we could arrange to have him kiss a lucky gal. Yes, Althea said, wondering why her voice sounded robotic. We could. Oh, I meant I could. You don't need to worry about the logistics. The logistics? Althea asked. Sure, you know, how he would kiss someone, just a peck, or... Winnie waggled her brows. Althea tried to stamp down the panicked feeling. Oh, or what? A real cowboy kiss. Althea swallowed with difficulty. What's a real cowboy kiss? The kind that makes your toes curl. The kind that says to a woman the man is in charge. No ifs or bulls about it. Isn't that butts? Well, that too. Winnie clapped her hands. This will be great. Althea thought of a lucky woman kissing Sheldon, or rather, being kissed by him and curling her toes, being taken care of by a cowboy in charge. Yes, yes, it will. It really was a clever idea. Winnie was brilliant. Then why did Althea feel miserable?
Chapter 26. Sheldon. "So what do you think?" Winnie asked at Sunday dinner. She looked each brother and Pop in the eyes. "Tater, cover your ears," Dylan said. "I already heard, Daddy. Winnie wants you all kissing women." "In that case, I'm in," Chandler grinned. Heath mused about it. "Well, nothing beats a puppy's kisses. Other than a gal's, I guess." "Let's hope the woman who chooses you isn't into licking," Chandler said. Heath made a face. "That sounds positively scandalous," Pop said. "You want me to kiss some random woman?" "Pop," Winnie said, trying to be gentle, "you'd be exempt." "What?" Pop glared at her. "Why ever would I be exempt?" "Well," Winnie turned to Patrick. "Help me out," she said through the side of her mouth. "Ahem," Patrick coughed. "Well, Pop, we wouldn't want you to besmirch Mom's memory." "Actually," Pop rumbled on, "I've been thinking about dating again." Everyone's mouths gaped open. "Well, why not?" Pop said. "I was married for good long years with your mom, so I know that marriage can be something good." He looked around some more, looking panicked. "Now I'm not sure." "We're not trying to talk you out of it, Pop," Patrick said on behalf of the Brotherhood. "It's just, we're surprised, that's all. We thought for sure you'd want to wait." "How long do you think I should wait?" Pop asked. "Not any time too soon in my book," McCoy said, probably dreaming of Sunday cinnamon rolls once again since Althea got away. Winnie poked Sheldon's arm since he was sitting right beside her. "Well, Sheldon, what do you have to say for yourself?" He cleared his throat. "I think it's downright evil." "Evil?" Winnie gasped out. "Yes." Sheldon looked like he was starting to warm up. "Why would you want to kiss a stranger?" "Some of these gals are people you'd have grown up with," Winnie pointed out. "Maybe some of them even have crushes on you." "They've also seen how I got left hanging at the altar." Sheldon looked away. "You mean," McCoy said, "why would they want to kiss a reject?" Chandler was right there to whop some sense into McCoy. "But it's true," McCoy said, thwacking Chandler back. "You don't call your brother a reject, dummy," Chandler said. "You two will be the death of me," Pop said. "Anyway," Winnie interjected, "Patrick said he was witness to y'all wanting to help out Althea. Are you going to do it?" Everyone, even Pop, nodded. Everyone except Sheldon. "Sheldon," Winnie said. "Hey, if I can do it," Dylan said, "you can." "So you're doing it?" Tater squealed at Dylan. Dylan looked cornered. "Now, wait a minute." "Well, I'm not you," Sheldon shook his head. "I can't do it. Sorry." He stood and walked off. Sheldon jammed his hands in his pockets, trying to forget the distasteful conversation inside. To everyone else, kissing was something to give away for a price. To him, it was a special moment between two people. That was the problem with his ex. She had given away her kisses too easily, and where did that leave him? He heard a footfall and wondered which of his knucklehead brothers was going to give him a piece of his mind. To his surprise, it was Dylan. "Hey," Dylan said. Sheldon didn't answer. "Been a long time since you and I talked," Dylan said, moving over to the porch pillar and leaning against it. "Just one-on-one." "Yep." "Probably not since I lost Jessie." "That long?" Sheldon couldn't believe it, but I guess so. Tater was just a baby. She was. Like a puppy, but cuter. Dylan smiled. Sounds like something Heath would say. It does. He did. "I don't rightly remember," Dylan sighed. "I don't remember a lot of things. But I remember the feelings, you know? Jessie and I were happy." Sheldon nodded. You were, I could tell. I always was jealous of you. But we weren't happy all the time, Dylan clarified. It wasn't perfect going. She hurt me some, I hurt her some, but we made the nicest miracle. Tater's something special, all right, Sheldon agreed. She worries for you, out loud. She prays for you and Althea every night. Me and Althea? Sheldon watched a falling star shoot through the sky, Tater's sweet gesture making him tingle. Yep. You and Althea are a package deal. She wants you to find true love. She's been watching these princess movies. Huh. But she doesn't pray for the two of you together. She wants you and her to be happy on your own. Sounds reasonable. Do you see the wisdom in that? Dylan said. Althea doesn't need to fix you. You don't need to fix Althea. You can be happy by yourselves. And your point being... Well, now, I think you're still sore about being dumped. And if I am? Sheldon shoved his hands in his pockets. Don't hold it against Althea. Couldn't you let go of the hurt and help her out? I'm not sore about her, he lied. I think you are, actually. But I'm talking about the other dumping, your ex. He was grateful for that courtesy. He didn't like his ex's name being bandied around. She's soured you on all women, and maybe Althea sensed that. Sheldon kept his chin up, easier for his eyes to keep from tearing up. Don't let her, Dylan said. Live your life free and happy. You're one to talk, brother. You could have had a mother for Tater by now. Sorry, harsh, but true. And you're right. I've passed on other women because I've been scared of losing them like I lost Jessie. Can't blame you there. But I might be ready to find love again, I think. Dylan chuckled. Ask me again tomorrow. That's where I'm at. I had been ready, you know. Sheldon looked at his brother. I'd opened up my heart to Althea, but she stomped on it, and she hurt me again. I might be a hermit for a little while. Maybe not forever. I hope not. Tater's been praying awfully hard. Your little girl's got my heart. I'll pray that he answers her prayers. Do you mean that? Sheldon thought of his jokey answer to Althea once upon a time. I think I was just praying for the wrong thing this whole time. But yes, maybe between Tater and me praying, we might get the other's wish. She prays for me too. Dylan pushed off from the pillar and clapped Sheldon on the back. Best of luck to all of us.
Chapter 27. Althea. Poor Bubbles didn't understand why there were so many delicious smells in the house, and none of that food was for her. Althea hugged her sweet doggie to make up for the fact that the only food she could eat were the crumbs that fell from the island. And then she washed her hands again, because that was what a good, conscientious baker did. Tater was allowed to come for only part of the afternoon. She'd fallen behind on her homework after 2 marathon baking sessions. Dylan had to put his foot down, and Althea respected him for it. It couldn't be easy to raise a child by himself, though Tater made it such a joy. At the sound of a tractor, Althea turned to look out her kitchen window. She hadn't heard that piece of equipment fire up since he helped her rescue Bubbles. She wondered if everything had dried out enough that he could work the ground. She wondered about a lot of things, actually. Did he ever think of her? Did he tell his brothers about them? Did he miss her as much as she missed him? Her white lie had cost Althea a chance at love and saved her from more pain. So it had all worked out, hadn't it? She threw herself back into working on cookies. They weren't going to bake themselves. By midday, she'd made up all the batches she had planned on, which was good. She needed to get going on furnishing the rest of the B&B, and she planned on stopping at the thrift store in the city. All she'd been able to do the past few weeks was bake, 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 freeze, freeze, freeze. This Saturday couldn't come soon enough. After that, she wasn't going to bake for a while. She was roused from her musings by a sound outside. And not just that, but a blur of white and black visible from her front window. She untied her apron and walked over to her door, opening it. A cute little black and white cow was munching on her rose bushes. "Oh, dear!" she cried out. Bubbles came up from behind her and barked. Unfortunately, that didn't faze the cow. "Shoo!" Althea said, shaking her apron at the cow. "Shoo!" When that didn't work, she called the pound, Fee Busby. It was her lucky day. "I'm calling to report a loose cow at Riverdale Lane." "And who is this?" Might as well spill the beans. "Althea Thompson." Well, hello, Miss Thompson." "Hello." "I'm not sure I can spare the time to catch other people's animals," he said. Althea sighed. "I know I've said some mean things to you in the past, but if you could please help me out, I would be so grateful." "Okay, fine. I'll be over." Before Fee could arrive, a familiar-looking truck trundled over into her yard. Althea watched Sheldon stretch his long limbs out of the cab and head on over to the porch. "Hey!" he said. "Hey!" The cow looked over for a moment and then went back to chewing on her plant. "I am so sorry, Althea," Sheldon said. "This escapee is mine. Normally, cows leave roses alone." Althea bent at her waist, an emotion swelling up from within her. "Now look," Sheldon said, putting a halter on the cow. "You've gone and made her cry." Althea raised her head and burst out laughing. "I'm not crying. I think it's funny." "You think it's funny?" He smiled too, and they stared at each other for a moment. "I don't mind it anymore," she said slowly as the realization came to her. "I live in the country, so I expect these things to happen. In fact, I welcome it." Sheldon was looking at her intently. Fee came by with his dog-catching van. "You should let him load your cow into his van just for fun," Althea said. Sheldon started to laugh, then pulled a serious expression. "Fee, howdy." Fee barreled on over and stood affronted. "So it's your cow, Sheldon?" "Yes." Sheldon shook the lead rope to get the cow's attention. The cow ignored him. "Well then, what are you waiting for? You ought to take her to my pasture." "Me?" Fee pushed up his glasses on the bridge of his nose. "Why should I? It's your cow." "Yeah," Sheldon said, "but she doesn't mind, and you seem to." Fee looked from Sheldon to Althea and huffed off. Sheldon and Althea laughed for a long minute. Sheldon rattled the lead rope and finally got the cow off the rose bush. "I had meant to prune the rose bush anyway," she said, glancing at the plant wistfully. Althea glanced back at Sheldon and caught him staring. He hurried and looked at the cow instead. Then he stopped lingering. Her traitorous heart came alive again in his presence. "Hey, how have you been?" she asked. He gave her a surprised look. "Me?" "No," she smirked. "I was talking to your cow." His smile made her knees weak. "I'm good, I guess, considering." His gaze flicked to hers and then away. Coward that she was, she didn't dare say anything else other than, "Has Winnie told you about her idea for the canned cherry cobbler cook-off?" He played with the lead rope. "Yep." She fingered her apron. "You gonna do it?" "The cowboy kissing booth?" he confirmed. The word bounced around in her head. Kissing, kissing, kissing. "Nah," he said. I told them to count me out." "Oh." She wasn't sure if she should be disappointed or relieved. "But I'll be there." "Okay then," she said. "Thanks for getting your cow back." "Of course. I'm sorry about the plant. I'm happy to replace it." "They're half price at the feed store." "Gotcha." She watched him make his way down her driveway and onto the road until she could no longer see him. When she went inside, she petted her dog. "He's not doing the kissing booth, Bubbles. I couldn't even buy a kiss, even if I wanted to. Just as well, because I can't afford it." And for what it was worth, Bubbles looked sadder than usual. Chapter 28. Althea. "You got it?" Althea looked back at Tater, who was struggling under the weight of a box full of cookies. "Yep," Tater said, breathless. The kid was such a sport. Althea just loved her. They trudged along side by side, taking their goodies to their booth at the county fairgrounds. There were paintings and posters of cherries everywhere. Men unloaded crates upon crates of canned cherries into freestanding cabinets. The event's sponsor, Sunnyway Market, Should make a killing. The day had turned out beautiful for the canned cherry cobbler cook-off. Tulips that had sprung up for Easter were swaying in flower beds. The slight breeze made the temperatures pleasant. Sunnyridge was a small town compared to other places, but judging from the turnout of both vendors and the early arrivals, the cook-off was a crowd favorite. It could be that everyone had cabin fever and was ready to be outdoors. Competitors for the cook-off were clustered in groups, fussing about to get their canned cherry cobbler masterpiece ready. Families streamed in, some of them carrying coolers. Althea found her booth number pretty easily. She and Tater left their boxes on the ground and went back for a fold-up table and chairs, as well as other things that Althea thought of: a cash box, receipt book, hand sanitizer, plates, and napkins. By the time the cook-off officially opened up, they were ready. Tater had helped Althea make a poster for the fundraiser. It included a picture of the Farland house and what the money was going to. Tater was going to go places. Althea just knew it. Right off the bat, Tater sold a dozen cherry-filled cookies. They had busted out to a good start. "When I start my B&B, kid," she told Tater, "you're in charge of my marketing." Tater glowed. "Okay." She leaned forward. "What's marketing?" Althea thought for a minute. "It's doing things to make people want to buy what you're selling." "Yep." Tater lifted her chin. "I'm good at that." Althea nodded. "That you are." Winnie had already arrived and was setting up nearby. She came over just as cowboys started arriving by the dozens. "I can't believe they're all here to support this cause," Althea told Winnie in a whisper. "To support me." "Sorry, sweetie, some might not be." Winnie waved at a couple of good-looking ones. "I kind of dropped the idea that my friends are here visiting." "Are they famous?" "Have you heard of the Perry sisters?" "No way! I love their music, especially their version of Sweet Home Alabama. And none of them are married?" "Not yet." Winnie looked across the fairgrounds. "Here they come." And what a sight they were in their Western glam get-ups and rhinestones. Althea got teary-eyed thinking of all these people coming together to help her. "Do you think they'll all get hitched?" Althea wondered aloud. "I hope not," Winnie said, looking skeptical. "Not based on a kiss. Wouldn't it be funny if they did?" "Their mom would have a heart attack," Winnie smirked. "She doesn't know about this, nor their manager." She put her finger to her lips. "So, hush, hush. The papers will spill the secret soon enough." Althea zipped her lips. It was all so overwhelming between the attractive cowboys, the Perry sisters, and the bevy of girls who surrounded Winnie to hear her announcements. Winnie made sure that while people were congregated, Althea's table and baked goods were near and accessible. By the time Winnie was getting ready to spotlight the first cowboy, most of the baked goods were sold, with people giving her extra money as donations. Althea and Tater gave each other high fives and set out the remaining few cookies, excited they might be able to watch the rest of the goings-on easier once they'd reached their goal and the cookies were all sold. Dylan came up to Tater, who hugged her daddy. They were so cute together. Althea had to look away. Although she was happy for them, she felt the hollow longing that usually came to her when reminded that she couldn't have children herself. Of course, that made her heart ache for Tater, who didn't have a mommy as well. For one split second, Althea considered Dylan. Handsome, reserved, with a heart-wrenching background. But she felt only a friendly affection for the widower. Unlike... Stop it, Althea. Thinking of Sheldon isn't going to do you any good. The first cowboy kisses went very well. A family of strapping cowboys got a lot of takers. Althea was impressed at the amounts that people were paying for the privilege of kissing the men. After a couple rounds of families, Winnie announced a little break, asking everyone to come back after lunch and to support the bake sale. That pretty much finished everything up at their table, leaving Althea free to explore the fairgrounds with Tater for a few minutes. Tater grabbed Dylan's hand, too, just as Sheldon arrived. "Hey, Sheldon," Dylan greeted him. "Come walk around with me. These ladies are driving me crazy." "I'm not driving you crazy, Daddy," Tater said. "You're already crazy." Sheldon laughed. Althea tried to ignore the pleasant tingle that went up her spine at the sound of his voice. She remembered that first time when she saw him, driving cattle past her house, that low voice and its effect on her. "Althea, look!" Tater cried out. Up ahead was a small Ferris wheel. Nowhere near as fancy as something at a bigger city, but it still looked fun and brought back memories of Althea's childhood, when the traveling circus and carnival would set up shop. She squeezed Tater's hand, and they sped up to approach it with excitement. "Let's do it," Althea said. Tater got in the first basket. Just as Althea was about to join her, Dylan cut her off with his arm. "Do you mind if I go with my daughter?" "Of course not," Althea said, though she was kind of surprised at his uncharacteristic rudeness. But when he got in and said, "You can ride with Sheldon," Althea realized what he was up to, especially when he leaned over and whispered into Tater's ear, making the little girl's eyes widen before she smiled. "I guess it's you and me on this Ferris wheel," Sheldon said beside her with a self-conscious chuckle. "Keep your hands and feet inside at all times, please," a teen boy with long, greasy hair under a baseball cap said in a nasal voice. Althea got in first. Althea tried to keep to her side without touching Sheldon, but the space was small, and their arms were practically on top of each other. "How's the bake sale so far?" he asked. "Good. People are generous to a fault. If the kissing booth keeps up the way it's been, I think I'll clear the amount I need to match Mr. Pitt's donation." "That's great. I might not be helping with the kissing booth, but I do want to donate to your fund." "Are you sure?" she teased. "It is for a motel, after all." He ducked his head. "You gonna hold that against me the rest of our lives?" Her smile wobbled. The rest of their lives? Would she be bantering with him the rest of their lives? Wouldn't he be married to someone else by then? As these thoughts circled her brain, he shocked her by putting his arm over her shoulder. "Sorry," he murmured. "The seat is so small, I feel like I'm squishing you." "No worries," she lied, while her body was going into a tizzy from his nearness. He smelled good, too, like aftershave, which had her looking at his jaw covered by sexy stubble. She could feel his eyes on her face. "Dylan told me something that I just need to test out," he said. His arm around her shoulders was throwing off her concentration, but she answered, "And what is that?" "He said that maybe you rejected me not because you don't like me, but because of a different reason." A different reason. If she were a parrot, she'd be a very good one. The Ferris wheel was slowly moving now, and she wasn't sure what the queasy feeling in her stomach was from, the ride, or the fact that he was pushing her, to be honest. "Could you please tell me the truth?" he said. She swallowed with difficulty and looked at her knuckles, white from tightly gripping the railing of their basket. Glancing back at him, she saw the raw need in his eyes. He deserved the truth, even though that opened her up to his rejection. She took a deep breath. 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with a reproductive disease. It's genetic, and it is not treatable. My parents and I looked into it more, got second and third opinions. It was true. And looking far back into my ancestry, it made sense. I had a few female relatives who either did not have any children or ended up adopting children. She paused. Because of infertility. Sheldon's eyes widened just a fraction, as though he was understanding her better. 2 years later, she continued, I met the man of my dreams, or I thought he was, anyway. The Ferris wheel was bringing her and Sheldon up now so that they could overlook pretty Sunnyridge. Farm fields stretched everywhere, ringed by clusters of neighborhoods. Anyway, Althea said, we dated for about a year. I didn't want to tell him about my condition. It seemed there never was an opportunity. I'm sure I was scared of his reaction, but then we got talking about getting married. We'd even gone as far as us picking out rings. Althea shuddered, recalling her ex's horrified expression. When I finally told him, he had the funniest expression. I thought he was sad that we wouldn't be able to have biological children, but no. He was concerned that he could get cut off from his parents' will because he wouldn't have any legal issue. Sheldon frowned, looking confused. He wouldn't be able to receive an inheritance until he could have a biological heir, she explained. So he called it off. Everything. Just right then. Sheldon's voice was gruff. What a fool. I like to think so, she winced. But at that time, I thought I missed out. It hurt a ton. Not only did he choose me over money, but I felt worthless, like a defective human. Her voice deepened. A worthless woman. She remembered the waves of shame that she'd felt that day her ex dropped her from his life, and the depression she endured in the aftermath. "I think you're the most beautiful, most complete woman I have ever met." His voice shook with conviction. She fought back tears, allowing his words to pierce the armor around her heart. "Thank you." "Is that why you tried to push me away?" he asked. "Were you afraid I would reject you too?" She couldn't speak, and instead nodded. "In fact, I still am." He lifted her chin and made her look into his eyes, straight to his soul. "I want you to know this doesn't change how I feel about you." She wanted so much to believe him, but we wouldn't be able to have kids. Not biological kids, maybe, but many kids would be lucky to have you for their adoptive mom. A tear escaped her eye, and he reached up to brush it off her cheek. She leaned with gratitude into his gentle touch. He cleared his throat. "I have something to tell you, too." She raised her head and took her turn to listen. "I was engaged to someone else years ago," he said. "She started dating me on the rebound from her boyfriend. I should have known that to be a red flag. Everything seemed to be going well until the wedding. She never showed up at the church. Turns out she was on her way to Vegas to elope with her ex." She turned her hand, palm up, so that their fingers locked together. "I'm sorry. That must have hurt horribly." "Yeah. It's taken me years to have the courage to even talk to an attractive woman. And then you came." His eyes burned into hers. "For the first time, I felt safe again to share my heart. So imagine what went through my mind when you said you couldn't accept my love." She reached up and ran her fingers tenderly over his scruff. "Yes, I can imagine." He gave her a sheepish smile. "You remember how you said God answered your prayers when he sent you to Sunnyridge?" he asked. "Yep, till the day I die." He laughed and then sobered. "Well, Althea Thompson, your love is the answer to mine." Joy flooded her being. He pulled her into a hug, and she savored the happiness that coursed through her heart. After several seconds, he tipped her chin up, and her breath caught in her throat. Inch by inch, his lips came closer. The Ferris wheel stopped at ground level with a jolt. The operator opened their basket and said in a monotone, "Thank you. Have a nice day." Chapter 29. Althea. Despite their last aborted first kiss, one of many so far, it seemed, Althea felt like she was floating on air. Hands in hand, they followed Dylan and Tater as they made their way back to the Cowboy kissing booth. Winnie's friends must have been matched up with their cowboys because there was a lot of hooting and hollering, and 6 cowboys walked off arm in arm with their gorgeous partners. "Perfect timing," Winnie said. "I'd asked McCoy to find you. The Brown brothers are up next." She glanced at their linked hands. "Well," Sheldon's hand tightened over Althea's. "Not all of them, as I understand," Althea said, smiling up at Sheldon. "Actually, I want to do it," Sheldon said. "What?" Althea gaped at him. "Smart man," Winnie cracked. "Yeah, why not? It's for a good cause." He winked at Althea. Althea didn't mean to, but she said in a shrew-like voice, "I suppose you'd like an excuse to lock lips with some other girl." His eyes danced. "I was thinking I would pay for the kiss so I could pick the girl." Althea could hardly breathe. "And who would that be?" He didn't answer and simply tugged on her hand, leading her up to the stage. Much cheering and yee-haws ensued. Winnie took the mic. "Here's a special treat, cowgirls and cowboys. We have here the reason why we're doing this in the first place. This is Miss Althea Thompson, who now owns the Farland home and is lovingly restoring it." Althea bowed to thunderous applause. "And, of course," Winnie said, "y'all know Sheldon Brown, a Sunnyridge old-timer through and through." He took off his hat and waved it to loud catcalls. "Remember, ladies and gents," Winnie said, "tip accordingly if their kiss sets off the Richter scale." There was more clapping and kissing noises. It was really going to happen. He was going to kiss her. Sheldon put his hat back on his head to the approval of the crowd. "Right on, cowboy," someone said. "Keep your head on." The air between him and Althea crackled with excitement. His fingers gently cradled the side of her face, pulling her to him. Althea swayed on her feet slightly and closed her eyes. Any moment now, his lips would touch hers. The crowd was silent. Then his low voice broke into her consciousness. I can't do it." Her eyes fluttered open as she looked into his eyes, tinged with regret. Her mind went blank, uncomprehending. After a moment of shock, the crowd groaned, whispers spreading like wildfire. They saw her as a woman he didn't want to kiss. But his rejection struck deeper. She had told him her secret, and he had lied through his teeth. He told her it didn't make a difference she couldn't bear children. But it did. Her heart went cold as her arms crossed her chest, ready for war. Chapter 30. Althea. Sheldon had the audacity to shield them from the crowd with his cowboy hat, as if that could save her from the bitter humiliation that she was sure she could never live down. Along with Mr. Pitt's hero, she'd be labeled Sheldon's cast-off. "I'll need to explain," he whispered. "No, you don't," she muttered. "Your actions speak louder than words. You said you didn't care about my not being able to have kids, but you did. I'm sorry." His eyes held an apology, which she refused to believe. I went about it the wrong way." She averted her face. "Oh, go away." "Althea, do you know why I said I couldn't do it?" "I already said the real reason." Her eyes returned to his face, wary. "What other reason is there?" she challenged. He took a step closer, and she could feel his breath warm on her face. She wanted to run off so he could no longer hurt her, but the love in his eyes was unmistakable. "Confusing. I couldn't kiss you for the first time with everyone looking on." His gaze caressed her face. "I wanted our first kiss to be special for you. For us." She could only stare at him as his words finally made sense. The whole day, the past several weeks, had been a crazy roller coaster ride, and it appeared that it wasn't over yet. His hand slipped around her waist, and he pulled her yielding figure closer. "I wanted this kiss to be the first of many special kisses," he murmured, "because I hope to be kissing you for a long, long time." The audience started to cheer and boo. Sheldon kept hold of his hat with one hand and cradled her face tenderly with the other. Her breath stilled, and she closed her eyes. At the touch of his lips on hers, she melted completely. The sounds of the boisterous crowd faded away, and all she was aware of was his real cowboy kiss. Her toes curled. He held her like he was in charge. His kiss deepened until she no longer knew which way was up or down. No one else had made her feel cherished and this loved. No one else had ever made her feel so complete. He was giving his heart to her for safekeeping, and she was giving hers to him. This was her cowboy for always.
Epilogue. Bram. 1 year later. The 3 children entered the room. Bram was 12, Gabe 11, and Tammy Jo 6. Bram let the younger 2 stand a little ahead of him, but he was on the alert, ready to snatch them to safety if needed. It was his role as the oldest to protect them, as he always had all their lives. They'd been fostered before, that was easy enough. What was hard was finding a family that would be interested in adopting 3 siblings, older ones at that. Bram held his emotions in check, keeping his expression neutral. A blip of curiosity flickered through his brain when he saw the couple behind the table, but that was all. The man was tall and he wore a cowboy hat. The woman had dark hair and eyes that looked like a surprising dark blue. She was pretty like his mother before she changed. He stiffened at the reminder. They talked for a bit. The couple, Althea and Sheldon Brown, said they'd been married for 6 months. Bram wasn't hopeful about them. He expected the interview to end like the others, a pleasant goodbye and nothing else. But the Browns kept asking questions and listening to what they had to say. Tammy and Gabe seemed to warm up to the woman especially. She asked what kind of treats they liked. Tammy Jo said ice cream and Gabe said green beans, to which Althea said, "Me too." Bram's ears pricked at the mention of horses on their farm. "You like horses, do you?" Sheldon asked Bram. His eyes were a warm brown, kind, like he couldn't beat up a mouthy kid, but you never knew with grown-ups. Yes, sir. The interview had come to an end. Bram led his siblings out of the room and reminded them to not keep their hopes up. I liked her, Gabe said. Him too, but I especially liked her. She didn't make fun of green beans. Tammy clutched at the bear she always carried around and nodded with round eyes. Me too. Bram did too, but he didn't say anything. When they found out the couple would foster them, Bram tried to keep his excitement on the lowdown. The long drive led to a 2-story house with rose bushes in front and a basset hound named Bubbles on the porch who had a litter of puppies. As if that wasn't enough to make Tammy squeal, there were 3 horses waiting for them in the back. Each of them even had their own saddle intact that Sheldon showed them how to put on. Bram got on a horse and never wanted to get off, but he did eventually, and he even allowed himself to smile a little. The house wasn't just a house. It was a bed and breakfast, Althea explained. Like a motel, Sheldon said. That Bram understood, though he wondered why the couple exchanged smiles like they had a secret joke between them. Sheldon also had a house on a farm nearby, next to all his family's. The boys shared one room downstairs. Althea and Sheldon had one and Tammy had her own. The rooms upstairs were let out to guests. They came mostly on weekends from all over. Althea made delicious breakfasts. Bram and his siblings learned to make themselves useful, doing chores, though Bram knew this was just temporary. Nothing lasted forever. But the weeks turned into months, until one day, Althea and Sheldon sat the children down. They asked them one question. Would you like to be our children for always? Bram was cautiously happy, and he didn't blubber with happy tears like Tammy and Gabe. The day of their adoption went by like a blur. Althea and Sheldon had bought them new clothes for the occasion. Bram was so nervous he sweated under his sport jacket, the kind that Sheldon wore to church. He wished he could be less worried like Gabe and Tammy, who still thought that the world was a good place. The judge had some nice things to say to each of them. Bram was trying hard not to cry, because it wouldn't do any good if he did, and then Gabe and Tammy would copy him as usual. So he held strong. He was really quite proud of himself for having so much control over his emotions. The judge banged his gavel, and then it was official. They now would go by the name Brown. Bramwell Brown. He liked the sound of that. Althea and Sheldon held hands and beamed at them. Bram's control was slipping because Althea was crying, and even Sheldon, this quiet, strong cowboy, was tearing up too. They opened their arms and Tammy ran into them without hesitation, followed by Gabe. Bram found himself moving forward too. And then, like a dam, he was unable to stop the tears from falling. Althea held him, kissing his hair and saying everything was going to be all right. He believed her. So far, she'd kept her other promises. Other relatives were there too, plenty of cowboys in big hats and low voices. They all fell into a line of hugs with lots more crying between them. Cowboys actually cried. What did you know? After all that commotion, Bram leaned into the arms of his new mom and dad. Mom and Dad. He liked the sound of that. Finally, he, Gabe, and Tammy were safe, with a cowboy and his wife who loved and welcomed them into their family circle and hearts, for always.
This has been A Cowboy for Always, Riverdale Ranch Romance, Book Number 4, written by Jewel Allen, narrated by Melissa Connell and Scott Rose. Copyright 2021 by Jewel Allen. Production copyright by Jewel Allen.